Hello everyone and welcome to the blog Clone Project. So this is your first clone project. I want to congratulate you on making it this far into the course. And in this project, we'll be creating a blog, and not just a personal blog, but you can think of it more as a company blog since it'll be able to have multiple users. This is actually a great first step to building a larger, more robust social network application, as a lot of the knowledge here is going to be directly transferred to our social network clone projects. And this project will include topics on almost everything we've covered so far, so take it on slowly and carefully. And I've made sure to add in elements from pretty much every section of the course. So if you skip the section, make sure you review it before actually coming onto this clone project. And I really recommend having the Django documentation open so you can cross-reference anything new you see. This blog is going to be a multi-user blog, as I mentioned, so it's kind of more like a company blog rather than just a simple personal blog interface. And this multi-user behavior is going to be easily extendable to future projects. So we're also going to be adding in some fun JavaScript and CSS features to give the site a more complete feel. So let's take a look at what the completed website actually looks like. Alright, this is what the website looks like running locally, and you can see here that I have some kind of fun CSS where the colors of the blog posts are slowly changing, and even if I highlight everything, my highlighted color will also slowly change. Obviously that's completely optional, but that's going to be a little fun CSS element we add to that, and that's actually pure CSS. That's not any JavaScript, which is interesting. So what we're going to be able to do is click here on this little profile tab, and that's going to show you how to use a Glyphicon. And then here we'll say, please log in, must be a super user, so we can log in. You can see stuff is changing colors. And then once we've done that, I'm a little zoomed in here so you can see it, but at 100% zoom in, we can see we can create a new post. And then we create a new post, select an author. Title will be my great post. And then you can see here, you can begin to type text. So we'll say something like, hello world. And if you've ever used a website called medium.com, which is kind of a blogging site, you'll know that if you highlight something, it gives you options on stating whether something's bold, whether it's italics, underline, header 2, header 3, and we're going to actually add in that functionality, whether you want a link in here. So this could take you to something like google.com, and now it's a link, etc. So that's all now in JavaScript, and we're going to learn how to add that in. So then I can save this. I have my great posts, and then I can also add comments to it. But note that it's right now a draft, so if I check out my drafts, I have draft do not publish, another mess up draft, and then I have my great post, so I can click on that, and then I can say publish this to the entire world. And now if I look at my tech blog, the homepage, I can see my great post has been published. So then on my great post, or any post really, we can edit the post. So I can come over here and edit, so we'll say new edit, save that, whoops. There we go. And here we see hello world, a new edit, and I can also add comments to it. So I can say, some visitor, type the text in, hey, that is a post. And then they also get access to doing things like bold or heading 2. Maybe you don't want that, but you never know. And then we'll post that comment, and it says, hey, that is a post posted by some visitor. And as a user, I get to approve or remove comments. So I approve that comment, check it, and then it takes me back to my great post. And if I look at my tech blog, come back to my great post, I can see here it has one comment. And there we go. And then you can also use this to link to GitHub, LinkedIn. There's an about page. Maybe this is about your company or about me, etc. So lots of cool stuff here, and we're going to learn a lot. And believe it or not, a lot of this functionality is actually not that hard to implement, given what you learned already. And then finally, the last thing you can do is delete posts. So you can click on this little X. Are you sure you want to delete my great post? Click confirm, and it deletes the post. All right. So let's hop over quickly to the slides and finish this all out. Alright, just a few last notes before we get started. It's also really common for real Django projects to make use of other open source third-party libraries, and we're going to be using quite a few, so make sure you follow along when we install them. If you're kind of going with the code and you ever get an error called no module named some sort of module, it's probably because you forgot to install it. So all you have to do is go to your command line and say pip install that particular module name inside of your virtual environment. And we're also going to be exploring different ways of organizing your Django projects. And we've previously discussed this organization method in the class-based views section. Definitely going to be implementing a lot of ideas from that previous section, so make sure to review it before heading on to this project. And a few final important notes. No amount of clone projects can show you how to use and do everything. So you're going to need to feel comfortable venturing out on your own and reading the documentation when it comes to your own personal projects. And if you're interested in learning a specific plugin, library, or API, you're probably going to need to reference outside materials if they're not covered in these projects. And one last final note, you should be able to have a full understanding of how we're building up the clone project shown here, but not necessarily memorizing every certain class call or function name, etc. So you should have an understanding, but don't feel obligated that you had to have everything memorized by this point in the course. Alright, let's get started. I'll see you at the next lecture. And welcome to part 1 of the blog clone project. And we're going to start off in this short lecture just setting up our Django project, the application. It's going to be a single application project blog, and then we'll also just do an initial run, make sure everything's working. After that, we'll set up a few files within our application, a couple of urls.py, forms.py, those typical files that we're going to need for larger scale projects. Okay, let's jump to the editor and get started. Here I am at the Atom text editor. Before we get started with anything, we want to make sure we set up some sort of virtual environment. This is optional if you don't have any plans on actually uploading this website to the web, then you're just working locally, but it's always a good idea to have a virtual environment. I'm going to be activating the one we've always been using, which is my Django env. Feel free to create a new environment for each project. In fact, that's what I would encourage you as a best practice. Okay, so I can see there by the parentheses, my Django env is ready to go. So I'm going to cd into a folder that I just made. It's called blog project, and you can actually see it up here under Django lectures. We have those older Django levels, and here I have Django blog project, and this is where I'll call Django-admin. Say start project, and then whatever you want to call the project, don't call this project blog because that's actually going to be the name of our application within the project. So usually you'll want to call your project some sort of nickname that corresponds to the site itself. For instance, if you were making an Instagram clone, you would call your project Insta or Instagram project kind of thing. You wouldn't want to call it something like pictures or messaging. So here what we're going to do is just call it the most basic nickname you can do, which is my site. So we'll say start project my site, and then we're going to cd into my site. And if I expand this over here on the left-hand tab, I should see my site and then my site. Remember, we get those kind of dual folders, and we also have manage.py. So within my site, I'm also going to start my application. So we can call it Django-admin, and you can actually do this with Python manage.py as well, but I like doing it through Django-admin just to make sure I'm doing everything correctly. And then the only application we'll have is the main blogging application that's going to be able to accept posts and comments for the blog, so we'll just call it blog. And that's sort of the reason we didn't want you to actually call the project itself blog, because the main application is called blog. Okay, so here I have blog ready to go. I'm going to expand blog, and there's a couple more files that I want in here. I want a urls.py file, because eventually I'm going to need that. So I will say a new file within blog called urls.py. And then I also plan to create some forms. So again, inside a blog, I'll say new file and call it forms.py. Okay, that's really all we need for now. Later on, we'll add some template folders, etc. But whenever you add in a new application, you always want to make sure that you come to settings.py, come down, scroll down to where it says installed apps, and make sure that the application that you just created is there. And if you ever get some errors with this, whenever you're running your server, make sure that your format is the same as mine. So notice here that I have blog project, my site, and then under my site, I have two folders. The blog, all the applications, the project folder, and then your manage.py. Sometimes it's a little confusing that you have two folders, a subdirectory of the exact same name as its parent directory. That's basically how Django does this automatically, so just keep an eye out for that. Make sure you're in the right my site folder. Okay, once you've done that, let's do what we should always do, which is called python manage.py and migrate everything. So we'll say python manage.py, migrate, hit enter. It's going to run all those migrations. Looks like everything's working well. And then we also want to set up our application. So we'll say python make migrations, and then call the application we want, which is blog. And whoops, I need to say python manage.py, make migrations, and then call blog. Okay, no changes detected in app blog. As expected, I don't actually have any new models there. We'll take care of that later on because here we have an empty models, but it's always a good idea to do that. And you've probably heard me say this a million times by now, but I always like to just run migrate one more time just to check that it says no changes detected and it says no migrations to apply. Perfect. So let's make sure this actually all works out. I'll call python manage.py and run the server. Okay, looks like we have no errors there. I'm going to copy this and bring over my browser. And then bringing over my browser page, here it is. It worked. Congratulations on your first Django powered page. That's exactly what we want, and hopefully by now, this whole process of setting up your project, the applications, a couple of the files you're going to need, doing the migrations, and running the actual server, this should all be really familiar to you, and honestly, by now you probably have these steps memorized. If you don't, I would encourage you to run through this one more time on your own completely until you have these steps memorized, because this is what you're going to be doing basically every time you start a Python Django project. That's it for this lecture. Pretty short one, just getting everything set up. In the next couple of lectures, we'll start actually filling out some of these files. Thanks everyone, I'll see you at the next lecture. Welcome to part 2 of the blog clone project. So our basic file setup is now completed from part 1, and the next step is to set up our models. So we have a models.py file inside of our blog application. And personally, I think it's always a good idea for a first step when creating a new project to create that models.py file and actually set up those models, because really if you're using class-based views, those are going to dictate the whole way your site works. So I think models are a great starting point. But really you should feel free to choose whatever feels like the most natural starting point to you. So maybe you like thinking about it from a URLs to views to model standpoint instead of the reverse way, which is the way I'm going to do it here. Once you've done enough projects, you'll have a natural flow. So don't feel like what I'm writing here is written in stone. I personally prefer doing the models first, but really it's totally up to you what you do first. Okay. With all that being said, let's hop over to the editor and get started on that models.py file. Okay, here I am at my models.py file underneath the blog application. And what I'm going to do is start setting up the models that we're eventually going to use in our views and in our URLs. Since I'll be using class-based views for the posts, it's a good idea to just set up the model. That way it's much easier to connect them when we're actually working with the views. So there's a few more things I need to import before we get started on this. I'm going to say from Django.utils import, time zone, and that's just all lowercase. And then I'm also going to import the reverse function. We've seen it before, and it'll make more sense when we're actually dealing with the class-based views and the function-based views that we'll see later on. But right now, I'll just import it, and we'll see how to work with it in a little bit. So it's from Django.core URL resolvers import reverse. And if we didn't have it right now, eventually when we're working with views and URLs, we would see some more sort of error that says, hey, maybe you should add a reverse method to your class. Okay, so the first thing is to actually create some sort of post model. So each blog post is going to connect to a model in our database. So I'll create a class, and I'm going to call it post, and it will inherit from models, dot model, not motel. And I'm going to have a couple fields here, or attributes. I'll have an author, title, text, a creation date, and a publication date. So I'm going to be able to create a post, but maybe not publish it right away. If I want to save stuff as drafts, I'll be able to do that. So I'll say author is equal to models, and this will be a foreign key. And I'm going to pass in here auth.user. And so later on when we deal with multi-user projects, we won't actually be following this sort of design. But since we only expect one person to really come in and have power over this blog as far as updating or having drafts and maybe even putting in comments and approving them, what we're going to do is just directly link an author to an authorization user. So when we create a super user, that's basically going to be someone who can author new posts. And then the title for posts is going to be models dot, that's going to be a character field, and we'll give it a max length of 200 characters. Really totally arbitrary choice here. And then we'll have a text field, so the actual text of that blog post, and that's going to be models, and we'll have a text field there. And I won't put a max length or anything because I don't know how long my text is going to be. And then finally, we'll have two date fields. We'll have a created date, and that's going to be models.aDateTime field. And the default for that is going to be timezone.now. So that's why I had to import from Django.utils, import timezone. And if you go to your actual settings.py file, so coming over here to settings.py real quick, it's actually over here in this new tab. If you start scrolling down, eventually what you're going to see is somewhere it should define what time zone you're in. So the internationalization, I have my language code in English, and you can see that I have this UTC time zone. So whatever time zone makes the most sense for you, that's what you should set up here. It's some sort of code for your time zone. And basically what's going to happen is as you're writing a post and you decide to say, oh, I created this post right now, it's going to default to you created this post at the current time zone. But for the publication date, we're going to say published date is equal to models, a date time field, and we're not going to have it default to time zone.now. Instead what we'll do is we'll say it can be blank because maybe you don't want to publish it yet, or it can also be null. Maybe you don't have any publication date whatsoever. So you can either leave it blank or have it just be null, meaning it can be empty. And that will make more sense when we actually start creating posts. And again, you have a lot of options here. You don't have to do everything the way I'm doing it, but this kind of makes sense for the way we're going to set up our project. And then finally, we're going to have a couple of methods on this. So one method that we need to do is actually set up the publication date method. So I'll say you can have a method called publish on this post, and any method inside a class should take self. I'm going to kind of collapse the tree and this terminal so we get a little more space here to work with. So I'll say publish self, and what's going to happen is I'm going to grab my actual published date attribute and then set it equal to time zone dot now, and then I'll say self dot save. So what does this actually mean? Well, remember that when I create a date, it doesn't matter. I always default to the current time I hit create, which makes sense. You can't really edit a creation date. So you'll say, okay, I'm creating a new blog post, hit that button. The date of that blog post being created is the current time. But the publish date can be blank, and it can also be null. When I'm ready to hit publish, there'll be a publish button. And then when I hit that publish button, it'll eventually say, okay, right now, when you hit publish, it's the current time, and I'm going to save that. So that's kind of all done automatically for you. The creation date automatically by this one line, publish date, since that's going to be linked to another button or function, we'll just pad it as a method here. Okay, then posts can have comments on them. So we'll create another method called approve underscore comments. That's going to be self. And then all this is going to do is say return self.comments, and I will filter it by approved. Let's make it approved with a D comments equals true. So what is that saying? Eventually, I'm going to have a list of comments somewhere. Some of them are going to be approved comments. Some of them are going to be not approved comments. So what I'm going to do is grab those comments, filter them by saying, okay, is this a truly approved comment? And then I can show them along with the post to anyone that visits the website. And then finally, with any model, it's always a good idea to have some sort of string representation of it. So we'll say str, pass in self, and what makes the most sense for a post is the actual title. So we'll say self title. And I'm going to save this. Eventually, what we're going to have to do is use this reverse method. So we'll kind of cross that path once we get there. So right now I'll leave it blank, but we definitely aren't done with the post class. But what I want to do, since the actual comment class is going to look so similar to this, it's a good idea that we kind of take care of it right now. So I'm going to create a new class called comment, and it's going to look really, really similar to what we just created. So it's also going to be a post. You can almost think of these as almost like mini posts. So it has a foreign key, and it's going to come from blog.post. And we'll give it a related name of comments. And that will make more sense when we start dealing with the actual views that have to do with the comments. Basically, this line is going to connect each comment to an actual post, much in the same way that if you come up here, we connected the author to an actual authorization user. Each comment is going to be connected to a blog application post. And then the author will say models.character field, and we're just going to have anyone kind of write their own name in there. So we'll say a max length of, I don't know, 200, even though that's probably a lot, but not a big deal. We'll have the text of the comment be really similar. We'll say models.text field. No constraints there. And then we'll also have a created date. And this will be models.aDateTime field. And the default is going to be timezone.now, which kind of makes sense. A comment, once they hit create that comment, that date time field gets put into place. And then finally, instead of a publication process, we have an approved comments process. So it will say approved comment, singular, is equal to models dot, and this is going to be a Boolean field, so true or false, is it approved or not? And the default is going to be false, that I haven't approved this comment yet. Okay, so let's save that right now. So just as a quick review of what we have, it's almost the same as if we come up here, the post class, but we have a comment class. Its post is connected to a post, so each comment aligns with a post. We have an author to it, which is just going to be basically what anyone wants. You can just write that in. Note that the author of the comment is not the same as the author of the post, nor is it a foreign key. It's basically just someone typing in who wrote it. So John Doe can come in and just say, hey, I'm going to post this comment here. I'll fill in my name, and it'll just be a character field. And then we're going to come up here, say text model.text field, the creation date, and then approved comments. And what I have to do is make sure that this approved comments is the same as approved comment here. So either they should both be plural or both be singular. Basically what I mean is they should both be the exact same thing. So here I said approved comments. I think earlier I said add an S in here. Since I'm leaving this one singular, let's actually just have them both be singular. So keep that in mind. Had a little typo there. They should both match. So either they both have an S or they both have no S. Okay, moving along, what I'm going to do is create a few methods here. I'll create an approve method, self, and we'll say self.approved_comments, and we'll say set that equal to true. This is essentially just like that publication method we worked on that post. And then we'll say self.save. And then what I'm going to do here is say def, create some sort of string representation, say self, and then say return self.text. Okay, I'm going to save this now. And so basically we have the main skeletons of a comment and a post. And hopefully you can see that they're almost the exact same thing, except that a post, its author is connected to an actual super user on the website, and its publication date is kind of analogous to the approval date of a comment, where a comment post is linked foreign key-wise to an actual post, and then we have this author, which is going to be basically anyone can just write their name in. Now to actually finish off this models.py, we still have to worry about the getAbsoluteURL methods. We've seen this before in the class-based view lectures, but now it's time to actually use this, and what we're going to do is take advantage of this reverse function. Basically, the whole idea behind this is after someone creates a post or a comment, where should the website take them? So what we're going to do is use those detail views for the posts, and we'll use some function views for the comments. But let's start off with this post class, and I'm going to say over here where it says approve comments, I'll say def and have that get absolute URL method, and it has to be called get_absolute_URL. This is something that Django actually looks for. You can't call it something else. And so it's saying, all right, once you've created an instance of this post, what should I do? Well, we're going to say return and call the reverse. Hopefully remember that we also talked a little bit about reverse lazy earlier on, but right now we just need reverse. And we'll have some sort of view that is a detail view, meaning we'll have eventually a post detail URL. And then something we're also going to add in is a keyword argument dictionary, or KWArgs. And that's going to be a dictionary where the primary key matches up with self-pk. So all this is saying is after I create a post, so I'm done creating it, and I hit some sort of publication, where should I go? Well, go to that post detail page for the primary key of the post that you just created. Makes sense, and it'll make more sense when we actually create the view for it. And if this is a little confusing for you, definitely refer back to those class-based view lectures. And scrolling down, we're going to do something really similar to the comment. And in this case, what we're going to do is say def. Now, since a comment needs to be approved by a super user, it doesn't make sense to actually go back to a list of the comments. Instead, what we're going to do is say, once that person is done typing in that comment, they're going to go back to the list of all the posts. It's kind of up to you what you think is most reasonable. Maybe you could have them go back to the actual post detail itself, but we'll just have them, since the comment actually needs to be approved before displaying there, we'll have it go back to that main home page of all the post lists. So I will say def get underscore absolute URL self, and I'm going to return as a reverse call to post underscore list. And that's going to be a list view, and we're actually going to use that as the home page. So the home page of this website is going to be just a list of all the posts. All right, so this actually seems like a really natural stopping point for part 2. So that's what we're going to do. We'll just end it here, but that's it for the models.py file. We won't need to mess around or edit anything else. So as a quick review, before we go on to the next lecture, we've created 2 classes here, or 2 models, the post model and the comment model. Comment model is almost like a baby brother or baby sister to the post, where we just have the author, the titles, the text, and then some sort of creation date and some sort of publication date. In the comments, we have the post, which connects to, or the comment post, which connects to an actual post, the author, which is just some character field so anyone can type in their name, and then we have the creation date and the approval date. And that's really all there is to it. We also have these get absolute URL methods, which once you've created a comment or a post, tells the website where to go back to. And that's basically it. Okay, thanks everyone, and I will see you at the next lecture. Everyone, and welcome back to part 3 of the blog clone project. So the models are all set up from the previous lecture. Now it's time to actually use them to quickly create some forms, since we already have that forms.py file set up inside that blog application. And what we're also going to learn that we haven't done before is how we can actually set up the form widgets to correspond to CSS classes. So what do I actually mean by that? Well, we've already seen something along the lines of injecting with a template tag form.as_p, which just injects your form as paragraph. And if you're actually using the Bootstrap templates, that looks okay. It's just a standard Bootstrap form where you kind of get everything from top to bottom using those as paragraph tags. But what if you actually want to style a particular widget? And remember, what I mean by widget is an actual form widget. So something like a form button or the text area, text input, etc. What if for whatever reason I wanted to actually take the text area widget and give it a different styling? For example, give it that medium.com styling that we're going to be using later. Well, all you have to do is add a widgets attribute to the meta class. And what this widget attribute is, it's actually a dictionary, and you pass in some arguments or parameters into that dictionary that link the actual widget to the class. Later, you can call in your CSS file that class name, and it will affect that particular widget directly. So let's show you how to do all of this by hopping over to the editor. Okay, so here I am at the editor. There's my models.py file. It's ready to go. Remember, we have a post model, and scrolling down, we also have a comment model. That's what we're going to be using in the forms.py file that we've already created. So the first thing I need to do is say from Django import forms. And once we've done that, I need to actually grab the models themselves. There's various ways you could do this. You could just say from .models. To me, I actually like having, as you've heard me say before, the application name, and then start calling files from that. So we'll say from blog.models, import, and then I'm going to import the 2 models we created, which was the post model and the comments model. And then let's actually create those classes. So I will create the post form class, which is going to take forms, model form, and then inside of this, I'll have that meta class. And inside this meta class, what we need to do is actually connect the model we're using. In this case, I'm using the post model. And then we want to also connect the fields that I want to be able to edit in this form. So we'll just edit the author field, so who's actually typing out this blog post. Theoretically, it should be the same person every time, but maybe we'll have multiple super users, so it could be almost like a company blog where you have other super users coming in. So we'll keep author as a field you can edit. Then we definitely want to be able to edit the title of whatever blog post we're using. And of course, we want to edit the text itself. And we'll talk about those widgets in just a second, but let's also edit the comments class. Or I should say the comment form. So I will say comment form as my new class, and then we'll say forms.model form. And then what I'm going to create here is meta. And inside of this, we'll connect it to the comment model. So there's the connection to the comment model, and then the fields here that this person's going to be able to edit. Well, they should be able to say who's writing the comment, the author, and then the actual text of the comment itself. Okay, and let me add in a couple more lines here so we get some space. And finally, it's time to add in these widgets. So what I'm going to do is add in the widgets first to the post form. And again, this is so that I can grab a particular field widget. So let's say I wanted to add a red border to the text area box that corresponds with text. Well, how would I do that? In that case, I need to actually add in widgets. So this goes inside of the meta class, so note my indentation here. And I create a widgets attribute that is a dictionary. And for formatting purposes, I'll kind of write this over multiple lines, but the first key is going to respond to a field. So I'll have title be a field, and then what I will have here is forms, dot, and then the widget actual name. So in this case, this is going to be a text input, and then we have the attributes, which is going to be attrs, and set that equal to, and here we have kind of a sub-dictionary, and we have a class, and then we can give it a text input class. So that'll be the first entry. And then the other one I want to be able to edit is the text. So this is how we're actually going to connect that text widget with those medium editor text area stylings. So I will say forms dot text area. So that's the sort of widget I'm doing. It's just a giant text area. And we'll say ATRS, those attributes, is equal to, and I'll set it with a class. And then we're going to have kind of a long class name that is attributed to the actual medium library we're going to be working with. So later on, when we actually work with the JavaScript and CSS of that medium editor library, we'll show you how I actually got this long class name. But for now, just copy or paste from the notes or follow along with me. But the classes we're going to pass here is the editable class, as in you can edit it. Then we'll pass in medium-editor-text area. So that's the actual class that's going to allow us to connect it to some sort of medium editor. And then what we're also going to do is add in our own class. So we'll say post content. So we're connecting this text area attribute, which is going to be our text in the blog post form. And it's going to be connected to a CSS class. In fact, it's connected to 3 CSS classes. First is the editable class. That means we can edit it, and that's coming from this medium editor library that we're going to be working with. Then we have the medium editor text area, which kind of gives it the styling of the actual medium editor. And then we have this post content, which is going to be our own class. So we're doing the exact same thing over here for the title, except we're saying it's text input class. Again, that's our own class. So the only classes that are not ours are these two right here that I'm highlighting. The classes that are ours is the text input class and then the post content class. Then we're going to scroll down and do a really similar thing for the comment form. So over here, we're going to have a dictionary widgets. And I'm going to set author, the first dictionary entry, to be forms dot. It's going to be a text input widget, and then we'll have this attributes. That's going to be a dictionary. We'll have it connect to a class, and in this case, I'll have it just connect to the same text input class here. So we'll say text input class. So whatever CSS styling this title is going to have, the author will also have it here, since they kind of serve the same purpose relative to their actual form. Again, you could create your own class here if you wanted to. If you wanted to add some specific styling elements to the author form box of the comments themselves. And then, more importantly, the actual text, we want to connect this to forms, text area, and in fact, this is actually going to be the exact same thing as what's up here, minus this post content. So I'm going to copy and paste this. Let me collapse my directory tree so you can see everything. And then I'm going to copy and paste it here. And then I'm going to delete this post content. So that post content class, I'll make sure that class is only suitable for the post form, versus here, I'm just going to have it kind of be the default medium editor classes. So those are my 2 widgets, and this is the main idea of how you can connect specific widgets to CSS styling. Again, the main idea is just you have widgets, it's a dictionary attribute inside of that meta class. You have the actual field, you'll say forms dot the actual type of widget it's going to be, and then you set attributes where you have a class key and then the name of the class that eventually will go inside your CSS. So since we're talking a little bit about CSS, let's set up the most basic CSS, which means we probably want to set up a static folder. So I will kind of open up my directory tree here, and this is going to go underneath right here. We see blog project, and then we also see my site. A lot of times what we've done in the past is have the static folder line up with the same directory as my site and blog, but when we were talking about advanced class-based views, we also discussed having template and static folders inside of the actual application folder. So that's the kind of following we're going to do here, since that's a little more common in the real world and doesn't line up exactly with the tutorials of the Django documentation, but a lot of times in the real world, each particular application is going to come with its own set of static directories and template directories, which kind of makes sense if you want these applications to be more plug and play. That way, in case you ever want to have some sort of blog application, you can quickly grab everything from this previous project and insert it or inject it into another much larger project. So what we're going to do is inside of this blog folder, I'm going to create a new directory. So we'll say new folder, and this folder is going to be called static. And inside of this static folder, I'll create two new folders. So I'll have a folder for my CSS, and inside of static, I will also have a folder for my JavaScript, and we'll call that .js. And inside of CSS, what we're going to do is we're not going to mess with it right now, but we'll set up the file that we'll be using. So we'll say new file, and we'll just call it blog.css. And we'll be working a lot more with the CSS towards the end, but right now we'll just keep it blank, but make sure that the static files are all there. And since we're adding the static directories, it's a good idea to come over to the settings.py file and make sure the static is all set up down there. So let's come over to my site, settings.py, scroll all the way down, because usually that's where we're going to put all that static stuff. So all the way down, here I have the static URL. That's totally fine. We do have it under a folder named static, but what I'm going to do here is say static underscore root is equal to os.path.join, as we've done before, and I will join the base directory with the static folder. That way it knows where it's to look for stuff. And then what I'm also going to do is create those template folders or directories. We haven't actually created any templates yet, but we will soon. And since we're messing around with the settings.py file, might as well do it all now. So at the same level of the static, underneath blog, I will right click, create a new folder, and I will call this templates. And then inside of this templates, let's have two directories. I'll have a new folder that shares the same name as the application. Remember, we talked about this in class-based views, where this templates folder goes underneath the application. Underneath that, you have the application name again. A little repetitive, but that's usually what we see in the real world. And I'm going to create a new folder here, and we'll call this registration. And when we actually begin dealing with registering users and authorization, we'll be dealing with a little template there, some sort of login page template. But since we have the template set up, might as well take care of that as well. So what I'm going to do is, I like doing this at the top. You can really do this anywhere you want in the settings.py file, but just to kind of keep in line with what we have been doing, I'll create the template dir here, and I will say os.path.join, pass in the base directory, and what I have to do here is actually point it to the templates we're using. So I'll be using blog templates blog. Save that. And then scrolling down here, pass installed apps, past middleware. Here's the template. Remember, this can take a list of directories. Well, we only have one template, but if we had other applications, we could be passing these as well. But in this case, I'll just pass in template underscore dir, and that's all there is to it. So now I save this, and we have our settings.py file. Now, we're not completely done with the settings.py file. Later on, when we actually talk about logins, we'll need to do a little edit here. So I will add this in right now. So scrolling all the way down, and we kind of talked a little bit about this during the authorization lectures, but we need a login underscore redirect underscore URL is equal to, and we're just going to, in quotes, put a single /. That way we have some sort of redirection to the home page once the person is done logging in. Okay, and we're going to talk a lot more about users logging in and all that stuff when we actually get to that. But so far, the main idea of this lecture, besides setting up the settings.py file a little further, was taking care of this forms.py file. So again, two main things we did here: setting up the forms.py file, learning how to actually use these widgets in order to attribute CSS classes to particular widgets, and then we did a little more in the settings.py file and set up our static and templates folders. Okay, that's it for this lecture. Thanks everyone, and I'll see you at the next one. Everybody, to part 4 of the blog clone project. So now it's time to actually get to the meat of the project, which is creating views and templates and connecting them to URLs. We'll start off with the class-based views handling the actual blog posts. And the basic structure that we're going to follow here is we'll try to create a view, see how to set it up, and then we'll create the template that matches with that view. A lot of class-based views have some sort of default template name, so we'll create that template. We won't actually fill out those HTML files. We'll do that in a future lecture. Okay, let's get started and hop over to the editor. Okay, so the first step here is to actually go to views.py underneath our blog folder. And underneath templates, I also have a blog folder here, which is where I will be adding those HTML files. So let's start off by actually creating the base.html file that we'll be inheriting or extending from. So I will create a new file under blog and call it base.html. So there it is, and I'll just type in HTML here. Later on, we'll work a lot more with these HTML files. But coming back to views.py, let's start off with that about page, since that's one of the simplest ones we have to do. So I will say from django.views.generic import, and I am going to import with parentheses. Since I'm going to do multiple imports, I can use parentheses to have them across multiple lines. And the first one that I want is this template view. So we'll say class, and we'll call this the about view. And this will be a template view. And all we have to do here is say the template underscore name, and we're going to connect it to about.html. And that's really all we have to do. And then we're going to come here to blog, create a new file, call it about.html, and then we can say over here something like extends, and then in quotes, something like blog/base.html, and then we can add a lot more content in here, like the body block, etc. But once we have that, the other thing we want to do is add this to our list of URLs. So coming back to urls.py, notice that I'm under the blog urls.py, which is currently empty. So let's set up a way to connect our site's urls.py to our actual blog urls.py. So I'll come first to the urls.py of our entire site. So this one already has the URL configuration. I will scroll all the way down, and then what I'm going to do here is say also import include, since I'll be using that. And then I need to import some views. So I will say, actually, we'll skip that for now, and we'll say URL. And basically, I'm just going to say anything that's not the admin page, go to blogs.urls. And we can pass this in as a string. And then what that's going to do is going to look for the blog's application and then find its urls.py file. So we'll save that for now. And that means we can come back to this urls.py file and start editing it. We're not quite done with the project's urls.py file, but for now we'll just leave it like that. We still have to add in all that registration stuff, but we'll talk about that once we actually get to that. For the urls.py file of the blog application, I'm going to say from django.conf for configuration .urls import URL. And then I will say from blog import views. And as always, you could have also said from .import views. And then we're going to have a URL patterns list, and this will eventually grow to be a super large list since we just have this all basically feeding into the single application. But let's start off by saying URL, and we'll have the about page be /about. So let's do this with regular expressions, and we'll say about $. And this is going to be views dot, and then the about view we just created. And remember, we have to say as view, and we'll give it the name about, comma, save. All right, so our first view is basically done now. So let's come back to views.py and start with the next one. And this is basically what we're going to be doing over and over again. There's going to be a ton of URLs, a ton of views, and as I mentioned, this is kind of the meat of the entire project. So the actual home page is going to be the list of all the posts. So we'll say class, a post list view, and that's going to inherit from a list view. So let's add that in on our import statement. comma, list view. And then I'm going to kind of start a new line here. Later on, we'll add some more imports. So I'll have a list view that I'm inheriting from, and then I need to connect this to a model. So I'm going to connect this to the post model. But in order to do that, I should actually import it. So coming back up here, we'll say from blog.models import, and let's import both models we created. We created a post model and a comments model. And then the other thing I want to do here is actually define how I want to grab this list. So let me grab a little more room here by hiding that terminal. And basically what I can do is I can create a method called get_query_set self. And this allows me to use Django's ORM when dealing with just generic views. That way I can add a little more of a custom touch to it. So we kind of did this a lot when we were working with function-based views, but we can actually do this as well with class-based views by defining particular get methods. And we'll get a lot more practice with this in future projects. But basically what I'm going to say is the actual query set I want is going to be post all the objects, and I want to filter them by the published _ date, and then I'm also going to add in __ LTE. And I will set that equal to timezone.now. And then I'm going to also say dot order by, and let me collapse this directory tree to get some more room here. And then I'm going to say as a string dash published _ date. And that's my whole query set. Alright, so what does this all actually mean? Well, with the get query set, I'm basically almost doing a query, like a SQL query, on my model. So this is essentially kind of Pythonese version of writing a SQL query. So what I'm saying is grab the post model, all the objects there, and filter out based on these conditions. So then we have grab the published date, and then with the field queries, you can do this really interesting thing where you say __, and then the actual field condition. So in this case, it's going to be less than or equal to. And I'm going to hop over to a documentation link in a little bit to kind of explain this part a little more, because out of all of this, this is probably the strangest thing, this __ LTE, which we've never seen before because we haven't really dived this deep into the ORM of Django. But basically what this is asking is, okay, grab the published dates that are less than or equal to the current time, and then order them by published date, except with this dash, we can clarify whether we want ascending or descending. Because if we were not to order them by dash published date, what would be happening is we would see the oldest blog post first. So here with this dash, I can order them in kind of a descending order. So the most recent blog post comes up front or at the top of this list view. So this is the getQuerySet method, and essentially allows you to use this ORM sort of a particular query on a list. So you can only get items that you want in the list with some sort of filter, and then you can also order them. So let me hop over to the documentation briefly to explain a little more about this kind of curious line __ LTE. Alright, so here I am at the documentation. I'm at the documentation for 1.10, although if by the time you're looking at this it's 1.11, this should be basically the same. And I'm under /topic/db/queries. And you can just do Control F or Command F and look up __ LTE, and you'll find a simple example. But this all falls under field lookups, where it's essentially how you can specify some sort of SQL query using the query set methods. And there's three main query set methods: filter, exclude, and get. And the basic lookups look like this. The actual field you want, those are the fields of our model. Remember, those are the attributes. And then __, and then the lookup type equal to some sort of value. And again, that's a double underscore. So for example, and this kind of plays along with what we've done, is we say entry, so whatever that model was, dot object, so grab all those objects, and then filter them based off some condition. In this case, they want where the publication date is less than or equal to this particular value. So roughly this translates into this following SQL. If you're not familiar with SQL, don't worry about this too much, but if you are, this is probably really helpful to you. So it says select everything from blog entry, or whatever entry we have here, where the publication date is less than or equal to this particular date. So almost exactly the same example that we're working with here. Now, if you're curious more about how this is actually possible, because this is definitely some more advanced Python as far as how the creators of Django kind of built this in with this underscore underscore, they have a link here to keyword arguments that you can read more into. But what you're probably more interested in is how do I actually figure out what's possible here in this double underscore. All you have to do is actually keep scrolling down, and then there's various examples that are available to you. So you can say underscore underscore exact, which translates into just an equal call. Again, keep scrolling down. You can say IExact, which is going to be case insensitive matching. You can say contains, and this is essentially just, if you keep scrolling down, a bunch of stuff that has to do with translating SQL code into Python. But the weird confusion about it is this more advanced Python mechanism where you have these double underscores separating the actual field versus the type of comparison you're doing. Now, we're not going to be using these too often throughout this particular project, but I do want you to be aware of them. And later on in a future section, we'll talk more about the ORM that Django has. But I just want you to be aware. Again, you can always check out the documentation page here if you want more in-depth information on this. But that's a little background to where we got all those commands from. Okay, so that's the post list view. Let's minimize this and go add this view to our actual urls.py file. So I'm going to come over to urls.py of my blog. So there it is, and let's actually add this in. So I'll say comma, call URL again, and then what I'm going to do here is, since this is actually going to be the home page, let's delete this and let's make this the top one. So usually you'll always see the home page as the first URL pattern, so let's do that here. So I'll just say r, caret, and then $. And this is going to accept views dot post list view dot as underscore view, and then I'm going to set the name equal to post underscore list, which is kind of the default name it expects here, and that's it. So again, I'm setting the home page to all my current blog posts that are published, and that's it for that particular post list view. So let's continue moving along, and you can always reference the code to make sure it matches exactly. So if you ever get stuck on something, make sure you're checking out the code notes. Next view we're going to make is another class-based view. So let's say I have those lists of posts. I click on one, it takes me to an actual blog post. That means it's a detail view. So this one's a lot simpler. All I have to do is say post detail view. And then what I'm going to do is up here, let's import detail view. Save that, and here I'm going to say detail view. And underneath a detail view, all I have to do is say model is equal to post. And that's it. That's a detail view, as we've seen before. Let's go and add it in. I'll come over to my urls.py blog, and then a lot of this is taken care of for me. So we'll say URL. And then here what we're going to do is for a post detail view, I'll say that's going to be under post. And then I'm going to add some regular expressions here, which is going to basically be taking the primary key. And we've seen this a little bit before, but let's go ahead and show it again. It's going to be question mark P, and then it's going to accept PK like this, backslash D, plus, and then outside of this, $. And again, I would never really expect anyone to know this off the top of my head unless they're working a lot with Django. This is more the kind of thing that you reference other examples or the documentation for. But we've already seen how to do a detail view, so we've seen this or something very similar to this before. But luckily, a lot of this heavy lifting is done for us, and all I have to say is post detail view and call as view, and this will automatically take care of matching the primary key to whatever you clicked on. And then let's give this a name, and we'll set the name equal to just post underscore detail. Okay, so that's a detail view of that post. Let's save that, and we'll hop right back over to views.py and move on to the next class-based view. So I'm going to kind of get some more space here. And the next thing I want to do is some sort of create view. So we'll say class, and we'll say create post view, and then we want to inherit from create view, but first thing I need to do is actually import it. So we'll come back up here, and then we'll say create view, save that, come down, and then what I want to do is connect my model to be equal to post. And that's what we've seen before. But there's a couple more things that we want to do here. And the main thing we want to do is I don't want anyone to be able to access this create post view. Earlier, when we were talking about authentication and authorization, we discussed using decorators. So remember we had that @ symbol with something like login required. But that only really works for function-based views. And now we want to know, how do we actually work with that sort of login required with a class-based view? And that's where the term mix-ins come in. So we haven't seen any real mix-ins, but they're really easy to use, just like those decorators were easy to use. You just scroll up the top here, and you're going to import them. So I'm going to say from django.contrib.auth mixins. I'm going to import, and then the one we want is called login required mixin. And you can basically think of this akin to the decorator. So I'll show you the example of the decorator one. Remember we said from django.contrib.auth.decorators import login underscore required. So essentially, back when you're dealing with function-based views, to actually get that sort of automated login required functionality, you had to use these decorators. But luckily with class-based views, the analogy to that is using these mix-ins. And these are essentially classes that we mix in to the classes we're inheriting with. So not only do we want to create view, but we're going to mix in that login required. That's kind of where they get their name from. So we'll say login required mixin, comma. So now I'm going to inherit methods from both of these classes. So not just create view, but also login required mixin. And with the mixins, they take in a couple more attributes that are necessary. So one attribute we want to do is set up the login URL. So in case this person's not logged in, where should they go? And later on, we'll say they should go to /login, almost like when you were setting up the static files. And then what we also want to do is have some sort of redirect field. So that attribute is called redirect underscore field underscore name. And I'm going to set that equal to blog/post underscore detail .html. And what this is going to do is going to say, all right, so redirect them to the detail view. And then we'll say form class is equal to post form. But that means we actually need to import that. So I'm going to scroll back up here. And we imported the models already, but let's actually import the forms themselves. So we'll say from blog.forms import post form and import the comment form. So what is this all doing? Well, I have the create post view that we've seen before. We've seen it with just a create view where you kind of have these models or these forms connected. But now I'm also kind of mixing in this login required, just like I did with decorators, but this is kind of the class-based view version. Also very easy to use. You just end up having these two fields where you want to redirect or where the login URL should be. So we'll put those all in here, and we will save that. And we're going to come back to our urls.py file and then match that up to some sort of URL call. So I will say URL, and we'll say this is post. And you can say post create, but you're not limited to just saying create. You can call this whatever you want. So oftentimes you're not going to want the URL to just always say create. Maybe you want your own specific thing, especially with larger sites for users. In this case, let's just call this post new, which kind of also makes sense. So we'll say our post/new, and then over here what I'm going to do is say views dot, and I'm going to create a post view dot underscore as view, and then I will say name is equal to post underscore new, and I'm going to save that. So this is now my create post view. So let's continue on. I've been able to check out the details of a post, create a post, my home page, and then my about page, checking off a lot of these boxes on generic views. Let's continue on. A lot of times I'll probably want to update a post. Maybe I made a mistake. So I don't want to just be able to create them. I want to update them, which means coming back up here, remember this is all from those CRUD lectures, I'm going to say update view. Scroll back down, and then we'll create a new class, and we'll call this post update view. And we'll have this also be login required. Makes sense. If I need to actually update something, I should be logged in. And then we'll call update view. And then this is going to have the same login URL and redirect field name as the creation of it. In fact, it's actually going to have everything the same. So we can just copy and paste this. And whoops, forgot my colon. And there it is. All right, so all these attributes are the same for update and creation, which makes a lot of sense. Basically, the only thing you're saying is, okay, now you're updating it instead of creating a brand new one, which kind of has to do with whether or not you're creating a new primary key or linking to an old one. So, same thing as always, come back to urls.py. Hopefully you're beginning to kind of feel out the pattern of what we're doing here. And we'll start with some regular expressions. So we'll say this is post. And actually this should be, these should have carets on them. So I apologize that I forgot about that. But there we go. These should all have carets now. And then what we're going to say is for the post update, we'll say post slash, and then I'm going to call the same sort of primary key to make sure it matches the primary key. This is essentially just making sure I link to the correct one. And then let's say something like /edit. And then we'll have a $sign here. So I'm going to say something like, oh, post number 1, edit that post. And then we'll say comma, views, dot. And then I should have a post update view. There it is. As always, you need to call it as view. And then we'll give it some sort of name. And let's call this name post_edit. You could have also called it post update if you just remember that name and match it where I call post edit. Okay, almost done with the post views. Coming back to views.py, I have right now my creating, updating, detail view, listing view, about view. This is all just for the blog posts. And then what I also want is to take care of the drafts. So remember, I publish posts, but before they're published, they're going to be drafts. So let's actually create a view that lists all my unpublished drafts, which means I'm going to create a class. And actually, before we do that, let's kind of sneak in a simpler one. What if I want to delete a post? I'll need a post delete view, and we'll take care of that draft in just a second. But this should also be login required. And this is going to inherit from delete view, which we haven't imported in. So let's do that as well. So update, delete, and if this is confusing you, definitely check out the CRUD lecture inside of the advanced class lecture, or section I should say. Okay, so here's class, post delete view, login required mixin, and then I'm going to call delete view. And this is a really simple one. We just connect it to the model that we're going to be deleting from, and then we need some sort of success URL. So hopefully you remember this as well. So what happens when you actually delete it? Where should it go? And remember that when you're deleting a view, you don't want the success URL to actually activate until you've deleted. Otherwise, you'll kind of be jumping always to another website, or another page on your website, I should say. In order to do this, we need to use the reverse lazy. So again, scrolling all the way back up here, we'll say from Django.urls import reverse_lazy. That way it waits until you've actually deleted it to give you back the success URL that you're going to be going to. So we'll have it go back to the home page, which is going to call reverse lazy, and then we'll pass in the post_list, and I will save that. Okay, so that's the delete view, and that basically takes care of our CRUD, this sort of creates, updating, the actual retrieval process. Well, that's just displaying it, so that's kind of inherent to all these classes, and then deleting. So these are my CRUD views right here, these three. And then I also have the detail, list, and about, or a template view, I should say. Okay, so come back to urls.py under blog. And I know this is a lot of code, but hopefully it doesn't seem super overwhelming. If you saw this all at once, it would seem kind of crazy. But I believe the way we're kind of structuring it out here, it shouldn't be so bad. And we just created the delete view. Let's set that up. So we'll say post underscore, and I'm going to copy and paste this again. And then we will say slash, and let's call it, I don't know, let's call it remove $. And then we'll call views dot, and this should be called post delete view. There it is. And then we need to call it as view, and we'll give it a name, and we'll call this name so it kind of matches up with the other one. We'll say post remove, comma. Okay, Now you could always break this up into multiple lines. So a lot of people, when they're working with these URLs, they kind of style them like this, just so it's more readable. I'm going to follow along with the actual notes that I have for you guys, where everything's on a single line. But keep in mind, this isn't exactly the best PEP8 styling since it's going beyond the number of character limits here. You can kind of see this line. It's a very faint line. But again, I think this is a little easier to read if you just kind of scroll back and forth versus having everything on multiple lines. Okay, just a little side note. Coming back to views.py, we have one last class-based view. We'll come over to views.py and finish it. And that is that draft list I was mentioning. So let's create it. We'll say draft list view. And this is just another list view. So again, I'm going to call a login required. And this will look a lot like the post list view, except it's going to have a query set, specifying that I want to make sure that the publish date isn't there. So we'll specify a login URL is equal to login. And then let's get some more lines in here. I also want the redirect. So let's actually say the redirect field name is going to be equal to blog/post_list.html. And then let's connect it to a model. The model is just going to be the post. And this looks basically exactly like the post list view. So if we jump back up to the post list view, remember, I said for the post list view, get me stuff that's actually been published less than or equal to the time zone now, which kind of makes sense. You don't want stuff future published just in case you get some sort of error that way. And then we also have the ordering of it. In this case, if I scroll down, for the drafts, I want to also get a query set, but I want to make sure that there actually is no publication date on it. So we'll say def get query set, pass in self, and I will return post.objects.filter, and I will grab that publish date __, and the method I'm going to use here is called isNull, and I'll set that equal to true. So what does that actually say? Well, if this is a list of my drafts, then I want to make sure that it doesn't actually have a publication date, meaning I want isNull to be equal to true. And then what we're going to do is off of that, I will call order by, and I'll order these by the created date. You could also say dash created date, kind of up to you depending on how you think these should best be ordered. So we'll save that. And let me make sure that my parentheses are balanced up here. Time zone now, order by. And if I look at this post view, I should actually have another parentheses here. Okay, so that makes more sense. So I was getting some weird errors because there was some unbalanced parentheses here. Let me scroll all the way over here and delete that one. Okay, so just a quick note, I forgot to add this parentheses because it should be an entire filter command, and then off of that, it should be an entire order by command. So I was accidentally calling off the .now instead of off the entire filter call. It's kind of more clear if we scroll down here, we have this entire filter command, and then we have this entire order by command. And last but not least, we need to still add this draft list view to our URL. So again, checking back to the urls.py file, and let's hit it up. So let me make sure I have a comma here, and I will say URL. And hopefully on your screen, this is a little more clear. Right now I'm zoomed in for you guys, but on my own screen, if I'm kind of programming by myself, I'm not as zoomed in. So what I'm going to say is post, and this is going to be for that draft list. So let's say, for instance, we want, actually let's just make this drafts. Keep it simple. So drafts, $. So if I ever go to drafts and I'm logged in, I'll be able to see all my drafts. And this is going to be views dot the draft list view. Since it's a class-based view, I need to say as view. And let's give this a name. Let's give this a really obvious name so I don't forget it. We'll say post draft list, comma. Okie dokes. So that is all the class-based views we're going to be working with in our project. Now I know I said that's all, but there's definitely quite a bit of them. Definitely take the time to review what we've done here. There is a lot of code. I mean, basically we just wrote, what, about 46 lines plus all these specific URLs, about 50 lines of code. So definitely take the time, review what we just did, check with the notes, make sure everything's matching exactly. in case you run into any errors. I know we haven't actually been running the site, but that's just to make sure you completely understand each of these views. Hopefully, this all made basic sense. The main things that were new that we introduced was the ability to have this get query set inside of these template views. And the other thing we introduced is, if you scroll down, this sort of login required mixin, which is just analogous to those decorators that we've worked with before. Okay, I know this is a really long lecture, so definitely take some time, walk around, relax. You definitely earned it after listening to all of this. Thanks, and I'll see you at the next lecture. Welcome to part 5 of the blog clone project. So we finished the blog post views and URLs, that is the class-based views that work with the actual blog post. But we still need to actually create the templates for the blog post class-based views, that is the actual HTML files that link up to those views. And after that, we can create the function views that are going to handle the comments. So let's get started and hop over to the editor. All right, here I am at the editor, and what we're going to do is first create all the templates that will match up with the views that we created here in our classes, and we'll create one extra template for the actual comments. We already have our about page template. That was actually quite easy. Remember, that was the very first one we did, and it's just linking to the actual base.html, which doesn't have much of anything right now. Let's create a couple more templates. I'm going to right-click on blog and create a new file, and we're going to have this one be the post_detail.html. And I do recommend that you follow along and name these HTML files exactly the same name that I'm doing here. Otherwise, when you actually run the server, you may see some errors that we saw and discussed when we talked about class-based views, that there's actually default names that Django looks for. So there's our post detail. Let's also create our post_form.html page. And let's create another one. And this one's going to be our post_list.html. It's going to be our home page with all the lists of all the posts. And let's create a draft list. So we'll say post_draft_list.html. And then finally, I want the delete for the post. So we'll say new file. And this one goes post_confirm_delete. So usually when you click on delete buttons, you need some sort of confirmation page. So there it is. And what we're also going to add in here is a comment form.html. So we haven't done any comment views, but we will in just a second. So let's create a new file and say this is the comment_form.html. Okay, so we have the about, the base, the comment form, post confirm delete, post detail, post draft list, post form, and post list. And then under registration, what I'm going to do is create a new file called login.html. And note that this is going underneath the registration subdirectory under templates. And we'll discuss registration, authorization, all that later on. We're going to do it a little differently because basically we're kind of piggybacking off the super users that you can create at the command line, since those super users are going to be people that are actually able to log in. Okay, I'm going to close all these HTML files and templates that I just made. Later on, we're going to be working with those a lot more. But here are my URLs. This is the site's URLs. We'll come back to that later. That's my about.html page, and here are my views. So essentially, we're going to do what we did in the previous lecture, a bunch of views, and then link a bunch of URLs to them. But in this case, we'll do it for the comments. So we already did everything that has to do with the blog posts. Let's continue on with the comments. So scroll all the way down. And if you want to match up kind of with the notes, I did some sort of comment or some hashtags here. So there's a bunch of hashtags just so we can kind of get an idea of what's going on and separate everything else out. Okay, so first thing we need to do is have some sort of publication for the comment itself. So we'll call this def, and let's have this be something like add comment to post. Add underscore comment underscore to underscore post. So this will allow us to add a comment to a post, and I'm going to have this be a request and take in a primary key. And what we need to do is actually import a couple more things in order to make this all work. So what I want to do is get the get object or 404 and then redirect and render. So coming all the way back up, I will collapse the tree right now so we get a little more room. Is up here where it says Django.shortcuts. Not only will I import render, but I will also import get object or 404. And we'll talk about that later on. And then I also want the redirect. And then I also want to make sure I have login required since we'll be using that later on. And then something else I probably want is time zone. So we'll say from Django.utils import time zone. And I know it looks kind of crazy with all these from import statements at the very top. So feel free to separate these with comments or kind of in chunks, however makes most sense to you. But let's continue on. We'll scroll all the way back down here and we'll come back to add comment to post. So what we're going to do is have the post object inside of this function be equal to get object or 404, and it will take in a post model object and have pk equal to the primary key provided with the request call. And I want this to require being logged in. We don't have to have it require login, just have anyone make a comment, but we want to have the login required just to kind of get some practice with that decorator. So we'll say if the request method is equal to equals to post, and hopefully it's kind of jogging your memory. We'll say form is equal to comment form, and then we'll take request.post, and we'll say if that form dot is valid, what we're going to end up doing is grabbing the comment, saying form.save, and I don't want to commit this quite yet, so we'll say commit is equal to false. What I want to do is connect that particular comment, post, to the post object, and then I want to save it. And then once that's all done, we're going to just return a redirect. So we'll say redirect to the post detail page with primary key being equal to that post's primary key. And else, so let's say the request method wasn't a post, meaning someone hasn't actually filled out the comment form. We'll say form is equal to comment form. And after all that, we'll return, whoops, we need to render the actual page. So we'll say request, and I'm going to have it say blog/comment_form.html. And if I expand my directory, I can confirm here it was called commentform.html. So that's what I'm putting in here. And then we're going to say pass in a context dictionary where the form is form. Hopefully this is more or less a little familiar to you given what we covered back when we were talking about forms. Okay, so in case you're feeling a little fuzzy on this, let's quickly go over everything. We have this decorator, which is a convenience decorator to make this entire view require being logged in. So in order to add a comment to a post, we take in a request and the primary key that links the actual comment to the post. So if you're on a post detail page and you click, okay, I want to comment on this, there's a primary key that goes along with that post. And then we're going to say, all right, either get that object, the post object, or the 404 page, meaning you couldn't find it. And pass in the post model, and then pk is equal to pk. So if the request.method is equal to post, meaning someone's actually filled in the form and hit enter or something, we have the form is equal to the comment form, pass in that request. If the form is valid, meaning they didn't mess anything up, we have the save of the form. However, we said commit false. That way we have at least some sort of form in memory. And we say comment.post is equal to the post object. And basically what this does is if we take a look back at our models, remember that the actual comment has an attribute called post, which is connected by a foreign key, which is the actual post over here. And that's basically what's happening here. We're saying, okay, that comment.post, make it equal to the post itself, and then save it. Once you're all done with that, redirect to the post detail page with the primary key being equal to the post.pkey, which again is just the pk or primary key for that actual blog post. Otherwise, so if this whole thing didn't happen, else, well, the form is just equal to the comment form, and we'll just return the comment form.html, passing in the form for the context dictionary. So when I actually come to this comment_form.html page, over here, this is where I'm going to inject that form context dictionary. All right, so that's it. Hopefully that feels pretty okay to you, but we still need to add that to our urls.py file. So let's do that now. Over here in urls.py, again, I have everything kind of as a bunch of long lines, but that's okay for us. we'll say URL, and I just created the add comment to post. So what we're going to do here is for regular expression, I'm going to say the following: caret post slash, and then copy and paste this primary key regular expression. And then what I'm going to do is say slash comment slash $. Where are you? There it is. And then we'll say views dot add comment to post. And let's give it a name that just says, give it the same name, add comment to post, as the function. There it is. And then what I'm also going to do is add a comma there at the very end. So saving that, let's come back to views.py, and we have one view down, but not too many more. We just need to add in a approval of the comment, a removal of the comment view, and then we'll also use function-based views to do the actual publication. So let's finish off the comments. And it's up to you whether you want to do it below or above this, but I'll go ahead and do it below. We'll say DEF, and we're going to make one about comment approval. So you should have to be logged in to approve a comment, so we'll just put that in now. Whoops. Decorator, login. So we'll say login required, and we'll say comment approve. And again, it takes a request in a PK, primary key. And then we'll say comment is equal to get object or 404. And we're actually going to be grabbing the comment in this case. And then we'll just say comment dot approve. So if you come back to the models, I should probably just open this since we're going to be referencing it. So if we come back to the models, we have this approve comment method. And if you have the comment, you have this approve comment method here. So what happens is if you call that method, you just say it's an approved comment. So you set this field equal to true when its default was false. So we just call the approve method on that actual model object, and that's all you have to do for the comment approval, which makes sense. We'll say return, redirect, and we'll send it back to the post detail page with the primary key being the comment.post.pk. So what's actually happening here, again, come back to your model, and it's all explained. Remember, the comment is connected to a particular post. And if I want to, after approving that comment, go to the post of that comment, then I need the post.pk. So it's actually coming back up here and asking, okay, what's the primary key of the post that this comment was linked to? And that's all there is there. So we'll save that, and let's add it to our URLs. Again, kind of a tedious process, but it's not so bad considering that you're really building a website with not that much code. All right, so what we have to do here is we just created the comment approval. I'll say caret comments slash, and we'll copy this so that it links, and then we'll say slash approve slash $. We'll call views dot, and I think it's called comment approve, yeah. And let's give it the same name. Name is equal to comment approve. There we go. And note that I'm passing it in as a string. So I'm kind of taking advantage of Atom's autocomplete for functions and then just using it for a string there. So we have two views, add comment to post and the comment approve view. We'll come to views.py again, and then what we're going to do is create another function view. And we'll have this one also be login required. So we'll say login required, and let me make a few more lines here just so you have more space to see this. We'll say this is for removing a comment, so we'll say comment remove. This takes in a request and the PK. It's going to feel really similar to what we just did. And we'll say the comment, whoops. The comment is equal to get object or 404 of that particular comment, where the PK is equal to PK. And then what we're going to say is the post underscore PK is equal to comment.post.pk. So linking that up, basically what we did over here, and setting it as a new variable. And the reason for that is because I want to say comment.delete. So I'm deleting that comment from my database, and then I want to return redirect and go back to the post detail. And then say pk is equal to post pk. So you might be wondering, well, why didn't you just do the same thing you did here, where you said comment.post.pk? Well, remember, if I said delete, by the time you get to return, it's not going to remember what that post.pk was, which is why I need to save it as an extra variable before I delete this. So this approval and this remove are almost the exact same thing, except I have to actually save that post primary key as a separate variable, so by the time I delete it, I still remember it over here. Okay, so pretty simple logic as far as what we're doing. And as you get more experience, these things will kind of come more naturally to you, especially as you move on to just purely class-based views, or for comments using some sort of outside library like Discus. But now we're kind of just grinding it out the hard way to get review on everything we've ever covered in this course, at least most of what we covered in this course. And then what we're going to do here is, set up that URL link to it. So we'll have this be comment as well. And I'm going to copy and paste this. It's almost going to be the exact same URL, except instead of approving it, we are going to remove it. /$, and then we'll say, comma, views.comment remove, and then we'll say name is equal to comment _ remove. Okay, so coming back to views, we have 3 functional views, all related to the comments. I need one more function view in order to publish things, and that is to publish posts. So I'll make this also login required, and this will be our last view. I know you're probably tired of writing these views by now, so we'll say post publish, request, takes in a primary key, and this one is going to look pretty similar to the ones we just made, except now it's related to the post. So we say the post is equal to get object or 404 of the post, pk equal to pk, and then we're going to say post.publish, and after that I'm going to return a redirect to the post detail page. So once you actually hit publish, you go straight to that post detail page where the primary key is just the primary key of the post you just made. And once we finish this functional view, we need to just come over to urls.py and add it in. So again, we'll say URL, and we'll do some regular expressions here, and we'll say this is post, and we're kind of going to add this to whatever this is. So it's essentially the exact same thing here, except instead of remove, let's copy this and just paste it in, save ourselves some typing. But we're not removing something for a post, we are going to be publishing that post. So we'll say .publish, or /publish, excuse me, views dot, and this should be called post _ publish, and the name of this, we'll just give it the same name, post _ publish. Save that, and now all your URL patterns are ready to go. So we have about 10 URL patterns, I believe, 5 through 15, and we have all our views ready to go. So you did a lot of work here, about 85 lines of code if you count the blank spaces or blank lines. Not bad. So we have all our views, all our URLs ready to go, and if we look at our templates, we have all the blank templates that are ready to be filled out. Next thing we have to do is just fill out these templates, make sure everything works together, set up the actual Bootstrap and CSS and JavaScript for everything, for those kind of special features, and we should be pretty darn close to getting a full functional website. Now it's just the simple templates. Okay, we'll set that up all in the next couple of videos. Thanks, and I'll see you there. Part 6 of the blog clone project. So we finished up all our views, and now let's wrap up all the URLs, including the URLs in the project urls.py file, by setting up a quick authentication system that runs on top of that super user group. That way, anyone that actually wants to create posts needs to be a super user. Should be pretty brief, so let's get started. Alright, here I am at the Atom text editor, and I will open up the urls.py file that corresponds to the My Site project folder. And here what I'm going to do is say from django.contrib.auth for authorization, import views. And essentially what I'm doing is I'm just importing some views, just like I would from another application, from the authorization application. And we've seen this actually done before. So let's set this up. I'm going to call URL, and I'm going to create a domain /accounts/login. This can be our login page. And we're just going to call views.login and give it the name login. And then the next thing we're going to do is create our logout. So we'll say r accounts/logout $, and here we'll say views.logout, give it the name logout, and then give it some keyword arguments, or some KWARGS, and we can collapse that directory tree, give ourselves a little more room here. Whoops, and then we'll say equal to, And what we'll do is we'll give it the next page. So that's the next page it's going to go to. And we'll have it go with a value of just a /. So when you log out, the next page you go to is just the home page, which is our post list page. Okay, so those are the URL patterns. And if we check out under registration, we have our login.html page, which is ready to go. So let's fill that out right now. And we'll say that this extends from blog-base.html. And depending on what plugins you have for Atom, this could be syntax highlighted. And we'll eventually have some base.html block. So I'm going to say block, and we'll have some sort of content block, which will behave as our body block that we've usually seen. You can basically call it whatever you want, and then we'll need to call end block here. So this is essentially going to be our login page. So I'm going to have it be a Jumbotron. Eventually in the base.html file, what we're going to end up doing is sending a link to Bootstrap. And we'll just say something like, please log in. Whoops. And then after that, we'll have h3. And in parentheses, we'll remind the person, must be a super user. Please check with the site admin. Just some sort of message there to indicate, hey, you must be a super user. If you're not, check into the site admin. And then here we can add in some logic. So what we're going to say is if the form.errors, and then whenever you have an if, you should have an end if. So if that's the case, so if our form has any errors in it, meaning essentially there wasn't a match between the user or the password, I'm just going to have something pop up here saying your username and password didn't match. Please try, please try again. Otherwise, we'll just continue on with this form. So we'll create a form tag, and it doesn't need a class. And for the action, what we're going to have it do is go to the login page. So this action, instead of index.html, I'm just going to have it using URL template tags. We'll say URL login. And we're basically, since we're in our urls.py file, pointing everything as far as all templates to go straight to the blog. I don't have, like we've typically seen, something like blog::login, because there are no templates at the site level. Everything goes to the blog. So in that case, I can kind of simplify things by just saying login. And we'll discover that more as we mess around with more templates. But we also don't need a, actually, let's make this capitalized just so it's clear. But what we do need, is the CSRF token. So let's add that in. So we'll say CSRF underscore token. And after that, we're going to have form.as_p. So that creates the paragraph form. And after that, we need some inputs. So we'll have a submit button. And let's give this a class that's going to align with the Bootstrap classes. So btn, btn-primary. Eventually, you'll start kind of memorizing more and more of these button classes. And it doesn't need a name because we're not linking it to anything HTML-wise. But we give it a value. And let's just have the button say something like login. And then beyond that, what we want this to have is some hidden input. So we'll give this a hidden input. The name will be next, and the value is just going to be next here. And this basically has to do with the view that we're operating with. So if we come back to urls.py, this login page, essentially this views.login, it's going to supply this next value for us, which is going to allow us to kind of deal with what to do next after this person's been logged in. And let's make sure this div is closed, and that's it. Great. So that's our entire login.html, and that's all we have to do for the URLs page in this actual, if we come back here, this is all we need to do. We should just have these 4 URL patterns, 2 of them dealing with login and log out, setting up the admin, and then including blogs.url. All right, pretty brief lecture, but basically all our login and authentication stuff, as far as actually going into registering on the site, should be done for us. Up next, what we have to do is take care of the rest of these templates, and that's what we're going to do in the next lecture. Thanks, and I'll see you there. Everyone, and welcome to part 7 of the blog clone project. it's finally time to actually start filling up all those HTML templates that we've created in the previous lectures. And we're going to start off with the base HTML template, since that's the one we're going to be using by extending it to all the other templates. And we'll also be setting up some of the CSS and JavaScript calls we're going to be making throughout the future lectures. Let's get started by hopping over to the editor, and I'll also be showing you the resources in the browser, so we'll kind of hop back and forth between those. Let's get started. Alright, here I am at the editor, and I've opened up the base.html file. So far we don't really have anything in it, we just have this doc type HTML, and I've gone ahead and added load static files. That way I can reference things such as the blog CSS file we did using template tagging, so I can say that static template tag. So coming back to base.html, we're going to add some stuff to this. So the things we need to add after adding a title is bootstrap. So I'll type that in as comments. So I want to add in bootstrap. I also want to add in this medium style editor. And that's going to be the thing that allows us to kind of mimic medium.com editing. And we'll show you what that means in just a second. We also want to have some custom CSS. And then probably some Google fonts as well. So we'll grab those as well. And then the other thing that I want is over here in the body, I will probably want a navbar eventually. So we'll be adding that in this lecture. And then since this is going to be the base.html, we'll probably also have some content. So I'll have some sort of body block here. Or I believe we called it the content block, so we'll call it content block. Okay, so let's save that. And let's come back up here and show you the resources and how to grab everything. So for Bootstrap, we've done this a bunch of times before, but just come over here to getbootstrap.com, and then I'm going to grab these CDNs. So I will copy this, and then I'm going to paste it here. And here we can see the latest minified CSS and also an optional theme is what I've copied and pasted. Those are the only two lines we need. And let me collapse this directory tree to give myself a little more room. Now the next thing we're going to add in is the Medium style editor. So in case you're not familiar with medium.com, let me show you what that looks like, and then we'll explore some GitHub libraries that are open source for us to use to mimic this. So I'm going to hop over to my browser here and close this Get Bootstrap. And here we can see I'm at a GitHub page. If you go all the way to the top, you can check out these links, but it's just at the user YABWE/ and then the Medium editor. And you can see this is actually a library that has a ton of commits. It's actually updated pretty recently as far as this filming, at least a month ago, it was updated. And if you keep scrolling down, you'll see that it supports most major browsers. But to actually get an understanding of what this is, I'm going to go to medium.com to kind of show you. So if you go to medium.com, right now I'm logged in so I can see particular articles. But medium.com is basically where anyone can just write an article or a blog, and everything has the same style and formatting. So if we click on one of these articles, such as this one, How Machines Make Sense of Big Data, obviously you can tell that I follow a lot of data science and technology articles. You'll click on it and it looks something like this, and every article or blog on medium.com basically has the same look and feel. You have images, and then you have this text editor, and you have kind of these wide margins. So it looks kind of almost like a blog post. And if you want to write your own story, you click here on Write Story after you've logged in, and then you have this sort of editor. So you'll say some stuff here, and then you can highlight this, and it gives you the option to either make it bold, make it italic, header 1, heading 2, or you can even put a link here and then say, I don't know, google.com, etc. And then you can see it's underlined, and now it's a link. So that's the kind of thing we want to mimic in our own blog posts. So if we come over here, after some searching, I was able to discover that a lot of people wanted this sort of functionality. And it's already here for a clone for us to use. And if you scroll all the way down, you want to make sure that whenever you're working with open source files that you found online, that there's some sort of license agreement. So we check on the license, make sure that we have permission to actually use this. Now I'm just using this for educational purposes. So you can see that this is copyright, but there's also a particular license. So there's permission free of charge to any person obtaining a copy of this software to deal in the software without any sort of restrictions. And then it's subject to the following conditions. Usually the conditions are for you just to source and attribute who you actually got this from. So here's the actual information here on this license. We're just doing this for educational purposes, but whenever you're doing something in production, you should always make sure that you have the rights to this software. Obviously, when things are hosted on GitHub and they're open source, things can get a little fuzzy. So if you ever have any doubt, feel free to just message the person directly. Coming back to the actual, let's go back here. Oh yeah, coming back to the actual Medium editor homepage here, on this GitHub, we can see that if you scroll down, it's essentially a JavaScript library that mimics exactly what the medium.com was doing. It has modern browser support, which is good, and it shows you some basic demos on basic usage. So what we're going to be doing is using this for text area, and eventually if you click on the demos, you'll find this demo. So this is under Medium Editor Demo, Text Area HTML, and you can see that after you've imported and linked everything, the JavaScript and the CSS, you just have to create this script here to create a new editor object, and you also have to make sure that it has this class, this editable Medium Editor Text Area, which we actually did back when we were creating that widgets dictionary attribute in the forms classes. And then coming down here, we can see that there's various ways to actually add this in as a file in our project. And there's a service called JS Deliver, which kind of acts like an external CDN. So if you don't actually want to download everything and link it up manually, you can just copy and paste these two right here. So one is the JavaScript file, and then one is the CSS link file. So I'm going to do that. The other option is, if you're having trouble getting these CDNs to work, then just do the manual installation, which you just scroll down here, and then you click down where it says latest releases. It'll take you to the latest release page, and then it'll say, okay, latest release 5.23.0. And then what we can do is find out all the information about that, and then just download the source code itself. And then just use the linking, which we already learned about with HTML, to link the JavaScript and CSS files. So I'll come back here to my editor, and I'm going to copy and paste that medium style editor. So there's only two things. There's that JavaScript, and then there's this CSS. So coming back down here, those are the two links I'm going to need to actually implement the medium style editing. And later on, we'll see in the template tags, I had to set up that widget class and then also call that script that we kind of just talked about. Then finally, for some custom CSS, make sure that any custom CSS goes after all these other CSS calls. And I'm going to link it here to this blog.css. So luckily, I've already inputted load static files, meaning I can just say, add a link here. It's a style sheet, and then for my href, I'm going to use static template tagging, which we've seen before, and just say static, and then call something like CSS blog.css, because if I look at the directory tree, that's where it is. We have static CSS blog.css. And right now, our blog.css is empty. And if you remember back to what the blog actually looks like, we have those sort of color changes that the text does, and I'll show you how I discover that. So what's a really fun website to check out, which we probably mentioned at the very beginning of the course as a way to share your code for front-end stuff, is codepen.io. That's CODPEN.io. And you can come here, and there's lots of pens. And essentially, this is just really nice, fun front-end stuff. So using those three front-end technologies, that's HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And CSS is actually really powerful. You can do a lot with CSS that you would think would be limited to JavaScript. So what I was doing, I was just messing around on CodePen. I kind of wanted to add some nice CSS to this, maybe something that was a little fun for the blog project. So eventually, after searching these, if you find something that interests you, for instance, maybe you wanted, well, not the box illusion, that's a little too crazy. Let's say you wanted to have this little guy, this rainbow preloader. So you click on this, and you'll notice that it has notes that it's only supported in Chrome. But if you wanted to add something like this to your site, what you could do is just copy this CSS, and then copy this HTML, which is basically an example of how to use this CSS, and that would be an easy way to have that on your site. So what I ended up doing is I discovered this little loading. So it's a simple loader, and we can click on it. And what it does is the background changes hues. And I wanted to, instead of having the entire background change hues, I would have the letters themselves change hues. And I didn't really care too much about these three dots that are loading. So basically what I want to grab is just the color changing. And this was actually all done with CSS. So I'm going to copy and paste this. And since we're using this for educational purposes, we don't have to worry too much about the license. But in case you wanted to use something like this in production, it's always a good idea to contact the creator and make sure that's okay with them. Obviously, they're hosting this all open source and there's no real license agreement here, but you should always check and make sure. So all you have to do is copy this and note the class. It's the class loader, and we're going to be kind of calling that on everything later on. So I'm going to come back here after copy and paste that, and I'm just going to put that into our own blog.css. So I will paste that here and then scroll back up. And I don't actually need the B1, B2, B3, etc. So all those is if you kind of check out this, we had class B1, B2, and B3. That's for these three little loading bars. What I really want, and I'm concerned with, is just this loader and then these keyframes. So I'm going to get rid of these .b1 classes. Scroll all the way down, and then kind of get rid of them, just to simplify my CSS script a little bit. And then what I want to do is the last thing, I don't want to change the background, I just want to change the color. And we'll be exploring this later on as we actually implement this. Okay, so there is my loader, and we actually don't need this left, right, top either. I don't need this position fixed, kind of simplifying this. These are the three things I only really care about. The hue rotate, so where it's actually coming from, the linear gradient of the color, and then the animation. So I will save this. And then we also see we have this h1 call, which we can leave if we wanted to, but I'm actually just going to get rid of it since we don't really need a heading 1. So that was, if you look over here, this loading awesome, how it's also changing. I don't really want that, so I'm just going to say save it. So the main things I care about are loader and then keyframes. If you keep the other stuff in, you may get some different behavior than what we've seen in the blog so far. And after we've set up our blog.css file with that extra code, the last thing we have to do is set up Google Fonts. So coming back to the browser, I have Google Fonts or fonts.google.com, and I'm going to search for the two fonts I used. Obviously, you have a lot of flexibility over which ones you want to use. I use one called Russo 1, looked kind of interesting to me. And then I also use one of my favorite fonts, this, Montserrat, and then we're going to add that as well. Two families are selected, so I'm going to open that up and then copy and paste the link here. So I'm going to copy that and insert that into fonts, and now I have the style sheets. Okay, perfect. And now what we're going to do is set up our nav bar. So we'll come down here, and we're going to set up our nav bar. So there's our nav, and let's set up the class calls. And I wouldn't expect you to memorize these. I basically was just looking at the Bootstrap documentation. And in fact, a lot of this was kind of just like copy and paste from Bootstrap documentation. So we use navbar space navbar dash default. And then I'm going to create another class called TechFont, which is going to allow me, if I go to blog.css, I'm going to add that in now. That's going to allow me to actually edit the font of the actual navbar. So let's add that in. I'm going to say the font family of that is Russo 1. That was the font from Google that we just got. And then it's also going to be sans serif. And then I'll set the font size to be, let's just say 1.5 EM. And then, of course, you have a lot of leeway with however you want to do this. And I'm going to give a little bit more margin here. So I will save that. So coming back to base.html. So that's my tech font. And then the other thing I want is custom navbar. So custom navbar is a class that I'm going to be using in case I ever want to customize anything else on my navbar. I'll leave it blank for now in the blog.css. I don't believe we actually ever really need it or use it, but sometimes it's a good idea to just add in another class while you're building up the base HTML template in case you ever want to mess around with it. So we'll save that. And then what we're going to do is have a div here, and we're just going to give this a container div. That way anything we put in the navbar will actually be contained. So we're going to have quite a few links here. First one is going to be, in fact, let's give it a class. First one's going to be our brand. So we'll call this navbar-brand. And there's something else you can add in here. We'll add another class, big brand. And that way we can link that to our CSS file if necessary. And big brand is just something to make it a little bigger. So I'm going to come over here and add in big brand class. And let's just have this be font size of 1.5 EM. That way it looks a little larger than the rest of the text. So if you notice back when we were running the blog project, the brand font size is a little bit larger than the rest of it. So that's what the big brand is for. And then continuing on with this, what I want to do is set up the link. So if you go to if you click on the brand, that should take you back to the home page. And remember, the home page for us is the actual post list. So we'll say URL post list, and let's call this something like my blog. Okay, so in fact, I'm going to expand this so we don't really need to reference the browser anymore. I'm going to add in another list item. And you can kind of fast forward for this if you don't want to watch me do all this, just as a heads up. And then we want an about page. either about yourself or the company. And we'll just have this say about. You can copy and paste all these links to make sure you get the spelling correct. And then let's have 2 H references. So we'll have a reference, an outside reference that is, to github.com. Maybe you're using this for your own portfolio site or your company's GitHub page. We'll have something like that. And then let's have another one to, I don't know, LinkedIn. And we'll have this say LinkedIn. Whoops. And let's put this all in an unordered list. So unordered list here, and this will be in their class, whoops, navbar-nav. And let's grab all these list items and put them into this unordered list. And I will save that. Okay, so now we have to make sure that if the user is logged into the website, they see those other options. And those other options were creating a new post, drafts, and then logging out, and something that says something like welcome user, or welcome Jose, etc. So in order to do that, I'm going to add in another unordered list, and I'm going to also give this a class, and we'll say navbar, actually navbar-nav, navbar-right. So everything's right aligned as far as the login information. And here's where we're going to add in some template tagging for some logic. So we'll add an if statement, and we'll say if the user is underscore authenticated, which comes from our imports of the auth library in Django. And whenever you have an if, you always got to make sure you have an end if. So we'll have that as well. And we'll kind of leave this towards the bottom. So if the user is authenticated, what are we going to do? Well, we should have a list item, right? And that list item, let's just give it a anchor tag. And the anchor tag is going to be a URL template. And the URL template is going to say, oh, link to post new, and we'll have it say new post. So I'm going to copy and paste this because I want 3 more really similar things. I want, instead of post new, to go to your draft page. So that is post draft list. And instead of saying new post, we'll just have it say drafts. So those are the unpublished blog posts. And then we also want some sort of log out button. So we'll have log out, and then this will just say log out. And then finally, after all that, I want one more of these, which is a little simpler. That just says, it's not even going to have a link. It's just going to say welcome. It'll say welcome, and we'll inject our name. So that's going to be user.username. Save that. Now, if you have an if statement, you probably are usually going to have an else statement in order for this to all work correctly. So if we don't have any of that, what is the right bar going to look like? So we'll say else. We'll have a list item, anchor tag, give it a link that says login, which makes sense. So if you're not logged in, you're going to want to log in. And we'll say, give this a template tag of URL, login, and let's give this a class so it aligns right. Navbar-right. And if you can see here, I believe it should fall under the unordered list class anyways, but just because I'm a little paranoid, I'll add it to that particular item as well. And let's scroll over here, and what we could do is just have something that says login. But instead, we'll have a glyphicon, which is essentially that little icon. And these are free icons that come with Bootstrap. And in order to use them, you just use the span, and then give the span a class. And the class name just matches up with the actual icon you want to use. So in our case, it's GLY, or glyphicon, and then we'll say glyphicon-user. And that's that little kind of Facebook-looking face, that little profile. All right, so that should be it for our navbar. So you can see here, if we kind of review what we did, we have everything on the left-hand side, the My Blog with the brand page, About, GitHub, LinkedIn, and then everything to the right. If the user is authenticated, we have these 3 links, new post, drafts, log out. If they're not authenticated, else. when we're just going to have, hey, go to the login page, and it's a picture of someone. It's not even some text. Now, outside of the nav bar, what we're going to do is set up our actual content. So let's do that. Let's put all the content inside some sort of div. And we can say, have a class called content, and then have another class called container in case we ever want to use it. And if we're interested in collapsing things, like if it's on a mobile display, this is where you could start adding in things like rows. So we won't really worry about this too much since we don't intend for people to really read our blog posts on a mobile. But you would just have the rows in here, and then you can start saying, well, this class is going to be something like call medium 8. And then maybe you have another class for the blog post, that way you can link it up to any CSS that you want to affect. But eventually, after you identify your divs, what you're going to want is the actual block itself. So that's going to be block and then content. Or body block, whatever you want to call it. And then we'll have end block here. Okay, so basically you can add in a bunch of divs here that refer to the Bootstrap ability to actually collapse things correctly according to whatever the grid system you worked out with. Okay. So that is it for the base.html file. It was a lot of typing, but it's definitely going to save us some time when we actually work with other templates. And that was hopefully a good enough explanation of where we got this Medium style editor from, as well as the Google fonts, and as well as this custom CSS if we go down here for the color changing. And the key thing here to note is that we're going to be using this loader class at the very end once we got everything done. Okay. Make sure you copy and paste this from the notes if you were iffy on actually following along with my coding here. Thanks, and I will see you at the next lecture where we begin to extend this to all the other templates. Hello and welcome back to part 8 of the blog clone project. So now we're going to continue on by filling out the rest of the templates. Let's hop over to the editor and get started. Okay, here I am at the editor. I have the base.html file opened here. And what I'm going to be doing is opening up the rest of these HTML files, and I can double click on them to open them up in new tabs. So I'm going to do that. And then in basically all of these, what we're going to be doing is extending from the blog base.html. So I have it already here in the about page. So let's collapse this directory tree and put this line in all of these, since we're basically going to be extending from base.html for all of these. And whoops, that's the CSS file, so we don't need to put it there. Okay. So let's start off with probably the simplest page, which is going to be our About page. So in this About page, this is just an empty template, and you can really put whatever you want here. But we're going to add in a call to the content block. So we'll say content, and then we're going to end that block. We'll say end block. And then here you can just put whatever you want. Just keep things simple. We'll have an H1 heading, and we'll say about this company, or you can say about me, depending if it's a personal blog, and then we'll say thanks for checking it out. And maybe you could put in a Jumbotron thing, etc. But what we're going to do is copy and paste this real quick and grab this block call. And now let me delete that end block. And I'm also going to paste that into all the rest of the HTMLs to set up the actual blocks. So we'll do that as well. Whoops. And that's because we're going to be using that in essentially every single HTML file, since that includes the nav bar itself. So we'll do that in all of these. Okay, so let me go across the board and save these. And the next one I'm going to work on is post list. Remember, post list is just the list view that lists out all the posts, so it should be pretty simple to work with. What we're going to do is after calling block content, I'm going to create a div tag here called center stage. And that's going to allow me to kind of center these a little more. And so over here in blog.css, I will create something as a new class called center stage, where anything inside this div with center stage, I'll call margin left to be auto to center it, as well as margin right. And you could also just call it margin auto, but this is kind of just to make it a little more clear what center stage is about. And hopefully the name is also pretty clear. But we'll have that. This isn't necessary, you don't need to do that. It'll just kind of be offset if you don't. And what we're going to do is have a for loop with Django template. So we'll say for post in, and remember the default is post list whenever you're working with a list view. It's that name of that model underscore list. And then whenever you have the for, you got to have the end for. And then what we're going to do is let's create another div, and we'll have this be the class post in case we ever want to do anything with it. And we'll say h1, have a link here, and this is going to be a URL. In fact, let's make sure it's a template tag, URL, and it'll take us to the post detail page with the PK, primary key, equal to post.pk. And essentially what this is going to do is we'll add in the template injection here of post title. And this says, okay, if you are able to click on that post title, since it's an anchor tag, it's going to take you to that post detail where the primary key of that post detail is equal to post.pk, where post is being returned for post and post list. And then after that, let's create another div, and we'll give this the date class. We may or may not use it, just kind of keeping us organized here. And then we'll have a paragraph that says published on, and then we're going to have the date. So we'll say post.published, and then I'm going to use some template filters. Remember, that's basically string functions or datetime functions that are from Python, and you can use them with template injections. And I'm going to use date just for some formatting here. So I'll say capital D space M Y. And note the spacing here, you sometimes get errors if everything here isn't touching together. So there's no spaces here. And then finally what I'm going to do is after that div, I'll create one more anchor tag that links to the comments. So we'll say here URL post underscore detail pk is equal to post.pk, essentially the exact same thing we wrote there. And then I'm going to say have some comments. Whoops. Comments, and then what I'm going to do is inject the comment count. So we'll say post.approve underscore comments, and then what I can call off of that is the kind of count attribute or count method. So if you go back to the blog post, page, basically what this is saying is if I were to click where it says, oh, comments 1 or comments 2, it would take me back to that post detail page, just like clicking the title would. Which kind of makes sense because if I click on comments, I probably want to see the detail page that actually has the list of those comments. And that's it for the post list page. And this is essentially our homepage for the website. So we're all done with this now. So let's go ahead and pretend someone clicked on it, which would bring them over to the post detail page. And this is going to be from a detail view. So let's get started on this one. This one's going to be probably one of the more complicated views, or at least the view that has a lot of content with it. So we're going to create inside of this block an h1 tag, and we'll give it the class. We'll give it the class equal to. We'll say post title, and then we'll say loader here. So remember, loader is that coloring class. So if you come back down here, loader, that way the actual colors change. And we'll show later on a kind of a quick fix to get everything to change color, especially the highlighting, which is essentially just coming back to the base.html. And over here, if you go to body, you could just call class and then say loader here, which is going to add a lot more coloring effect. Now be careful of this because you don't want to set everything to have like the background color, so make sure that this is set to color. Okay, coming back to the post detail page, after doing those changes, what I'm going to do is have the heading 1 be the title of the post. And then what I'm going to do is have an if statement that says if the post published date, I will say else, and then I'll have an end if, just to kind of set up my logic. Okay, so what are we going to do? If the post published date, meaning there's some sort of publication date, then I'll create some sort of class here, pass in date, the post date, and then I'm going to inject the post.publish date. Else, which means it's not published, what we're going to do is say else and have a button here. So this button is going to be, we'll give it a class so it looks nicer. We'll say btn default. just one of those bootstrap classes. And what it's going to link to is a button that asks you, oh, do you want to publish this or not? Because if it doesn't have a publish date, meaning it didn't pass this if test, it hasn't been published yet. So what we're going to do is if you click on that publish button, it'll take you to URL to the post publish where your primary key is equal to the post primary key. And there we have it. And then we're going to end if. So let's save that. And then after that, once that little post title is done, or you have the publish button, what we're going to do is add in a paragraph here with the class equal to post content. And we'll be adding these classes to the CSS file later on. Some of them we won't use, some of them we will. I always think it's a good idea to kind of add in more classes than you may need. And then once you fill out the CSS and your website looks good, you can then go remove classes. But it's really helpful for organization to have these classes here, whether or not you're going to use them right away. And what's going to be here is going to have the post title, and then we're going to have safe on it. And basically what safe does is, since we're going to be using that medium JavaScript editor, if we select something as bold, we won't want it to show up, for instance, in the website looking like this, like, oh, bold text with the tags. So if I don't have safe here, and I've affected it using the medium editor, it's going to look like this, including the tags. If I have safe, then it's going to translate that HTML to actually look like we expect it to look. And if that doesn't really make sense, you can basically just take off safe here, and that'll immediately make sense as far as what I'm trying to convey. And then what we're going to do is call one more that says line breaks BR, which essentially, if there's a line break, the HTML will also call a break there. And then we're going to have another if statement that's going to check if the user is authenticated or not. So we'll say if user is authenticated. We're going to do some stuff, but as always, if there's an if, you got to end if. So let's create some new lines here. So if the user is authenticated, we should probably have something, or let's say 2 buttons, one to edit the post and one to remove the post. So the first line is going to be an anchor tag, and we'll give it a class. And the class is going to be a primary button. So say btn space btn primary. And then we'll say URL post underscore edit. And we'll pass in the primary key is equal to the post primary key again, just as we've done before. And then we're also going to insert inside of this an icon. So let's do that. We'll use a span tag for that. So we'll say span, and we just have to give it a class. So the class we're going to say is this glyph icon, or glyphicon, depending how you pronounce it, and then another glyph icon pencil. So that's going to look like a little pencil. So in case you want to actually edit the post, you click on the pencil icon. And then I'm going to copy this, and let's do another one for removing the post. So instead of post edit, this will take you to post remove. And then instead of a pencil glyph icon, we're going to just say remove, which is a little X. Okay, so that's all we need to do there. Let's continue on. So I'm going to kind of create a separator here. So we'll say, actually, yeah, we can do a horizontal break there, or a horizontal row. And then what we're going to say is have a class here, and let's have a button that allows us to add comments. So we'll say this is an href that takes you to the URL that is add comment to post, with the primary key being equal to the post primary key. And let's actually give this a bootstrap class so it looks nice. We can say something like btn primary, btn comment. So if we ever want to do stuff, we can add it to that. And then coming over to the right, we have add comment to post, and let's have something in this link that says like add comment. So we'll save that, and then I'm going to put everything else here inside of a container class. So everything that's left. And basically inside of this container is going to be the list of the comments. So we'll say for comments in post.comments.all, and because I have this, I want to end for. So let's add that in now. We'll say end 4. And then after that, what we're going to do is, whoops, let me close that in. What we're going to end up doing is saying this. So for every comment in post.comments, I'm going to add in a break. That way we get a little bit of space. And then I'm going to check if the user is authenticated or if the comment is an approved comment. Otherwise, I don't really want to display it. So I'm going to say if the user is authenticated or the comment is an approved comment, going back for that model. And since I have an if statement, it's a good idea to just take care of the end if right now. I'm going to pass in the comment created date, so let's inject that in. Say comment dot created underscore date. And then what I'm going to do is say if not comment approved, approved underscore comment. I'll have two buttons here. One to remove the comment and then one to approve the comment. And these are going to be really similar to what I have here. So I'm just going to copy and paste these. And let's line these up. So I need two end ifs. So here I have the end ifs, and I'm going to tab these in so they look a little more clear. I'm going to paste this in. So let me give this one more here, and let's copy and paste this one more time. And then here we'll have remove, but instead of a post remove, it's going to be a comment remove. And instead of a post remove here, or actually we can just say this is comment remove instead. So I'll have the top one be comment remove. So comment remove, PK is the comment primary key, and then this span class, we'll just have it be remove, so that stays the same. And we can have this be, instead of a primary button, a default button. And then the second one is going to be an approval. So instead of saying comment remove, I'm going to change this to say comment approve. So comment approve, and the PK does need to be the comments PK as well. And then the other one is going to have to be glyph icon. You can really choose any glyph icons you want, but we'll just say OK. All right. So that's our little if statement to kind of check if everything's okay as far as what buttons we show. And then below that, I'm going to actually add in the information with some paragraph tags where I will say, put in the actual text of the comments, pass it through safe in case they use any special HTML, and then say line breaks. So that we actually take care of new line breaks. And below that, we'll add in one more paragraph tag, where this paragraph tag is going to say who it's posted by. So posted by, and then I'm going to inject the comment author. And we can pass it in as bold if we want, but that's it. And then what we can do is, in between this end if and this end for, have a template tag to check if something's empty, meaning if there was nothing in the post comments at all, we'll just say, okay, empty, and then it's a nice easy tag call for if this is empty, what you can post. In this case, we'll say no comments. Okay, so this was definitely one of the most complicated views we had to do throughout the entire project, so let's quickly go over it. And if you want to actually reference any of this, I'd highly recommend that you kind of just copy and paste from the notes provided to make sure everything matches, because there's a lot of stuff we could have possibly gotten wrong here. But essentially all we're doing is we're saying, okay, put in the post title. If the post has a publication date, start the post date, and then actually place it, the publication date. Else, we're going to have a button here that says, hey, do you want to publish this? And then it'll take you to the post published page. After that, you have the actual post content, which you start off with just the post title, make sure it's safe, and then have the line breaks. If the user's authenticated, they're going to be able to edit the post or remove the post. So that's what this block of code's doing. Below that, we're going to be able to add comments to the post. And in this case, we have this container for all the comments that are linked to that post, because we have post.pk. If the user is authenticated, or the comment's an approved comment, we're going to show the creation date. If the comment is not an approved comment, so I'm logged in, I should still be able to see these comments, but they're not approved, I can either remove the comment or give it the OK that it's been approved. And then once that's done, we're going to show the comment text, safe with line breaks, and then show who actually posted that comment. So that's actually all this post detail is doing. So lots of code, but the idea is pretty straightforward. Okay, We'll continue on with this in the next lecture where we go with the other templates. Thanks, and I'll see you there. Everyone, and welcome back to part 9 of the blog clone project. We've already finished quite a few templates, such as the base.html, which is going to be extended to every other template. It has the navbar, all the CSS and JavaScript calls. Then we also did the template view, that simple about.html page, where we just had 2 basic lines. We also did the post list, which is going to be the list of all the blog titles and the comments, etc. that acts as our home page. And then once you click on one of those blog titles or the comments, it takes you to the post detail page, where that's the actual blog content. So let's now continue by filling out the rest of the templates, and we're going to start off by doing the post form. So if you ever want to edit or create a new post, you're going to be taken to the post form.html template, so that's where we'll start. And let's hop over to the editor and get started. Okay, here I have the post form.html ready to go. I have the extends and the block content plus the end block. And let's just put a header in here. We'll say heading 1, and we'll say something like new post. And we're going to create a form here. So we'll call form. We'll give it a class post-form in case we ever want to have a class that does something with this. It doesn't really need an action because we're using Django for that. And then the method should be post. I always like having it in capital letters just because that makes it more clear to me. So I'll put that in. And then with any form, as we know, we need a CSRF token. So we shall say, CSRF underscore token. And then I'm going to inject the actual form dot as p. And remember, back in that form page, we had that widgets attribute, which is going to let me have classes to individual elements here. So in case I never really need to use post form, I already have the classes set up where I can actually grab particular elements or widgets from that form. And then finally, we're going to need a button. So we'll create a button. There'll be type submit, so we can actually submit this. And let's give it a class that kind of goes with the look and feel of Bootstrap. So we'll say, let's give it the save class in case we ever want to affect this particular button. And we'll say btn default. So you probably notice I'm kind of creating classes as I go along with the templates. Some of these I'll use, some of these I won't ever use. But what's nice about these classes is if I ever need to actually do some CSS editing on this particular button, it already has its own class call, which I can add to more submit buttons. And what's also nice is just reading the template itself makes it a lot easier to understand what's going on with these classes, regardless if I use them or not. So let me collapse this directory tree, give ourselves a little more room. The name of this button, we actually don't need it to have a name, so I'll delete that. And let's just have this be save. And then that's the end of the form, just form, the token, and then the button itself. And here is where I'm going to call script. So you remember back to when we were exploring the Medium Editor GitHub page. I'm going to call script here and basically follow along with what they said. So you can check back on that video or on that demo page, but what they said to do is create this editor variable here on the page, and then set it equal to a new medium editor object, and then have it grab the editable, or editable, however you would say that, and then save this. And remember that this .editable class is attached here as a widget. So if you go back to the actual models or forms, so let's come back to models, or actually it was under forms, come back here, there it is. So here under post forms, remember we added this editable class for the text itself. So that's essentially what's going to help us link when we're working with the post form page right here, this medium editor. And whoops, had too many E's there. Okay, so save that and we should be good to go there. So that's our post form page. Now let's create a post draft list. So maybe you haven't published this yet, in which case you have the list of all your drafts. So this one's also going to be quite simple. We're going to have a for loop that's just going to go for the posts and then give some sort of creation date. So let's do that. We'll say for post in posts, and then we need an end for here. End for, and then what I'm going to do is add in a div. So we'll call this the post class. Again, may or may not use this, but kind of helps me read along here. We'll have a paragraph tag and give that, let's give that the class, I think we were calling him date. And we'll say created. And then we're going to inject here post.created underscore date. And we've seen before, I can add in this template filter where we will say date. And let's just have it be dm, -y. Okay, and then what we're going to do next is let's have a heading 1 with an anchor tag where the href will take you to that actual post detail page. So we'll go URL post detail with the primary key being equal to the post.primary key. And this will just be the post title. So the post title will take you to that post detail page, which kind of makes sense. Collapsing that directory tree, get a little more room. And then we'll have the actual post text. So we'll inject that in as well. Post.text. And I'm going to use another filter called truncate characters, which is just going to help this as far as formatting. Not necessary, but kind of up to you. So we'll have truncate CHARS 200. Okay, so that's it for the draft list. Basically what it's going to do is go through all the posts in the post and then say when it was created, and if you click on the link, it'll take you to the post detail page. And it will truncate some characters so you don't see everything. So we'll save that. And now we have our post draft list ready to go. Let's start with this delete view. So we have this post confirm delete. That's actually really simple. Once you click on the delete view, there needs to be some sort of a success URL that will say, hey, do you actually want to delete this? So we'll create a form, very basic form. Doesn't need an action, and we actually don't even really need to give it a class since it's essentially just a button here. And what we're going to do is inside this form, I'm going to create the CSRF token, and then we'll just have something like, are you sure you want to delete ? And let's actually inject object here. So this is something that delete view does automatically. The object itself has that name, are you sure you want to delete it? As we saw before when we were working with class-based views. And then we'll have an input, and the type will be submit, and let's give it a class, and let's say btn danger, which is always a good call when you're going to do a delete view, have it be danger. In our case, we won't be using this coloring. Eventually the loader will overwrite that coloring, but yeah, for your more basic sites where we don't have such funky CSS calls with the color changing, a danger is a good call for these sort of delete buttons. It doesn't need a name, but let's give it a value, something like confirm or delete or whatever you want. Save that, and that's it for the post confirm delete page. So really similar to what we've done in the past with delete views. So that's it for that. We have post form HTML ready to go. Comment form is something we haven't done yet, so that's going to be a really similar form to the draft or the post form, excuse me. And let's create h1, and this will be a new comment. And then what we're going to do is say form, and we can give it a class post form just so I can refer to it later. It doesn't need any sort of action call. And then what we're going to do here is give it a CSRF token, and then say form as p. Give it a button, and this button we'll say it's a submit type button. Doesn't need a name, but let's give it a class. We'll give it the save class that we did earlier and say btn-default, and it doesn't need a name, so we'll take that out, but we will give it some text here that says something like post comment, and that can be the end of the form. And since I want the form or the comment form itself to have the same capabilities of the medium editor, I'll add in that script here as well. So kind of up to you whether you want the comments to have such flexibility, but just so we explore what's possible here, we're going to do the same thing. So we say the variable editor is equal to new medium editor, and then we'll adjust the class to be editable or editable, and then semicolon to end that. Okay, so let's open up all the templates and make sure we finished all of them. We have the about page ready to go. We have our base.html ready to go. Comment forms ready. Post confirm deletes ready. Detail page in the post. Draft list ready. Post forms ready. Post list is ready. And then we still have this login HTML that's also ready. Looks like we finished all our templates, so let's come over here to blog.css and finish just a couple of those CSS calls. This is basically totally optional, and this is where a lot of your personal choices will come into play as far as what you actually want the blog to look like. So don't worry too much about what we're going to be doing here. This is just so it lines up with the actual example code from the notes. So I've taken care of this tech font. That's the font that goes in that nav bar. We'll have big brand that just makes it a little larger. Center stage just kind of centers things a little bit more. And then we have the loader. So I'm going to create kind of something that says here, color changer below, comment that out, and add in some of my own classes. So something we also did was this post date, which I'm going to say text align center. And some of the classes we made we won't be calling here, so just keep that in mind. And then I'm also going to create a post title. So post title, we'll give it the same font family as Russo 1, but maybe make the, let's say, font size a little bigger. This is the actual title of the post, font family, Russo 1, and then let's make the post title like 3EM, just so it's quite a bit larger. And then we'll have it be text align center. So it's centered there. So that's the post title. And then for the actual post content itself, so I'll have a post content class, and then I'm going to give that the font family of, well, let's say that's Montserrat, and then I will add in a font size that makes it the same font size as the post detail view. There we go. That way when you're editing it or viewing it, it all is in the same size. And I believe we already did something called center stage up here, so that one's good. And something else we want to do, maybe have those buttons. So I think we created one called BTN comment button. I'm going to add in position to be absolute. And we'll see if this actually affects, and we'll bring it all the way to the right. We have 0 pixels. So that's just kind of the add comment button, shifting it all the way to the right. And we already have Big Brand ready to go, I believe. If we scroll up. Okay, Big Brand's ready to go. So we finished off the CSS and the rest of the templates. So we should be mostly good to go. We might need to do a quick review, do any bug finding, but we finished basically like 99% of the site. Okay, so coming up next, we're going to kind of wrap everything up and see if everything worked, maybe debug a little bit. I'll see you at the next lecture. Everyone, and welcome to part 10 of the blog clone project. So now it's time to actually debug and get our project up and running by setting up the admin and doing the migration. So let's go ahead and finish off this project and make sure that everything's working correctly. I'm going to hop over to the editor now. Okay, here I am at the editor, and the first thing I want to make sure that's set up is my admin.py file under blog. I haven't actually done the registrations yet, so what I'm going to do is say from blog.models import post and comment. And once are those ready to go, I'm going to say admin site.register, and that should actually be a lowercase r. So we will register post, and then we're going to do the exact same thing, admin site register, and I'm going to register comment. So save that, and then I'm going to bring up my terminal. And with the terminal here, what I'm going to do is cd into the blog project folder, and then let me cd into the my site folder. And this is where I should be able to call python manage.py, and I will call migrate. Let's see if that works for us. Make sure there's no errors. This may take a while if you haven't done it yet. And then the other thing we're going to do after this is, okay, here we go. Bingo, we have some bugs that we need to do. So it says right here, in line 28, class comment, name model is not defined, which means we probably forgot to import something in the actual models. So let's come over here to models.py and make sure that's all fixed. So we'll come over here to, this may be either in the forms or, let's see, no, it's in the models.py file. Come to models.py, so it says model is not defined, meaning this should have been coming down here, models, plural. So I'm going to save that, and let's run this again. And I'm kind of trying to show you realistically how you would actually go about doing these sort of debuggings. Okay, so this next bug that I got was an import error, no module name blogs. So all I have to do is scroll up and try to find out where was I trying to call blogs when I should have just been calling blog singular. And it looks like here in line 22 of my URLs under my site, I was calling blogs.urls. Easy enough. I just come back to urls.py, come over here and see where I was actually calling blogs. And actually, this is the wrong urls.py file. This one is the one I want. Scroll down, and it says blogs.url. That should be blog singular. Save that, no problem. And now let's try to run this again. And we're basically going to keep doing this until we fix out all these various bugs. Now, if you don't actually want to spend the time to go through this sort of more realistic debugging process, feel free to just copy and paste all the text files from the actual notes. But this is kind of trying to show you what realistically would happen if we went about the project this way. Okay, so we have some invalid syntax. I probably forgot to close this off, so we'll say from blog import views, and this is in the views.py file. I'm going to hop over to that, views.py, And it looks like it's having issues with my syntax here, and it's because I forgot a comma. So save that, no problem. And we'll run python manage.py, and it needs to say oh, no migrations to apply. Perfect. So let's actually check this out. We'll say python manage.py, and I'm going to say make migrations blog, run that, and it looks like it said create model comment, create model post, add field post comment. Perfect. Now I'm going to say python manage.py migrate again, and it's going to apply those migrations to the blog. Perfect. And now what I'm going to also do is say python create python manage.py create super, if I can spell this right, super user. And then what I'm also going to do here is hit enter, and we may have an issue. So it says, hint, it seems you set a fixed date as a default for this field. This may not be what you want right now. If you want to have the current blah blah, you can actually ignore these for now. It's not a big deal given the way we're doing things. So what we're going to do is say username is Jose, email address, we can just do whatever, hello@gmail.com. Password, I'll use test password. Password again, we'll say test password. And then the super user was created successfully. So let's see if we can actually get this project to run. We'll say python manage.py run server. And there it is. So time to kind of cross our fingers and make sure we actually get everything to work. I'm going to copy that, and let's bring it over the browser. Okay, so coming to the URL page, we see this no reverse match. And if it looks empty like this, where it says no query set, or when arguments are missing, 0 patterns tried, this is a really common error when you're working with URL templates. And if you see here, it says error during template rendering, which kind of gives you a hint that it has to do with templates. And it's also in the template, and it's right here. If you kind of zoom in, let me do a couple pluses here. It's under post list.html, error at line 0. And you notice at the very first line what we're doing is we're extending from base.html. So that's where we can look for this actual error. And this is something you're going to see all the time, this sort of no reverse match, especially while you're starting out, which is why I kind of really want to show you how you can debug this on your own. So we'll come back to the editor over here. And what I'm going to do is here I have post list.html. I can double check to make sure my URLs are okay. And usually a common mistake is to kind of mess up these quotes right here or forget these quotes up here. And if you come back to base.html, these are all looking okay to me. What we can do at base.html is do Control F and then look up URL and then explore which ones seem to be having the errors. So we see here we have this nav bar, so there's URLs in there, and we can kind of find the culprit right here. URL post list, looks like we forgot to put, or I forgot to put in the quotes. So I will save that, and now let's kind of start this guy back up again. Well, actually we can just probably come here and refresh this page, see if it works. And there it is, my blog about GitHub LinkedIn. So far so good. We'll keep our fingers crossed, make sure everything's working. Hit that button, and bingo, have another error. It's a template syntax error, and it's happening at account login. So thanks to Django, I kind of already have an idea where it's happening. It's happening at login.html, but even better, it says invalid block tag, that's a keyword, with form.asp. It says expected end block. And you might be thinking, well, that's weird. We never have to put an end block with a form. And then it says, did you forget to register or load this tag? Well, maybe I did, but that's weird because I wouldn't have an end block with a form asp. And if you scroll down, it actually highlights it for you. And this is where we can actually see the error we did. Here, we were using the wrong template tagging. Remember, with form.asp, you just inject it. It's not an actual code here with the %sign. So coming back to our login.html, what I actually should have done was have this sort of syntax, these double brackets, since I'm essentially just injecting that form in. So I'm going to save that, and now let's try this again. I'll come back, refresh the home page, and now it seems to be working if I hit the person. My username is Jose, and then let's input test password, log in, see if we get an error. Okay, looks like I'm zoomed in right now, which is why you kind of get this weird behavior, but if you start zooming out, you see it right align. So let's check this all out, see if it works. I'll hit a new post, see if we get an error. So far so good. Jose, title of my post, test post, and let's type in some text. So we'll say something like, and we can see that the color changing is working. So this is a test. And if I highlight it, I can see that if I put in bold here, it's actually working. So let's save this, see if we get an error. Okay, looks like that's actually working. Nice. Let's try editing it first. So it says this is a test. I'm going to say add on edit. And I don't actually want this to be bold, so we'll say something like underline it without the bold. And then save that. Okay, so looks like we are not seeing the actual content of the post, so it just says test post. We'll have to check back on that, but let's see if we publish it if we actually end up seeing that content. So I hit publish and nothing's happening. I'm not being redirected anywhere. Meaning if I come over to my blog, I don't see anything. So something has an issue when we're actually dealing with editing and posts. So let's come back here to drafts and bingo, we found the error. Okay, so now we see we have this field error at drafts and it says it cannot resolve keyword created date into field. Choices are author, author ID, comments, create date, etc. So this is actually quite an obvious error, hopefully. You can see here that somewhere along the lines, I started calling it created date instead of create date. So we have two options here. Either I change the model to have it say created date, or I change this keyword to say create date. It's up to you at this stage which way you should go. If you already have a bunch of stuff in your models, you've already created a bunch of blog posts, then you should probably affect the keyword here instead of the actual choices here. But what we're going to do is kind of explore how we could fix this since we're just starting out. So I'll hop back over to this, and I'm going to come to models.py to kind of confirm. Here I have create date, and what it should have been is created date. So I could do that, or the other thing I could have done is go back to the actual reference of created date. So if I come over to drafts, whoops, let's expand this. So coming over to my post draft list, somewhere along the lines here, I said created date instead of create date. So I would actually usually recommend that you fix this in the HTML template rather than coming over here and affecting your model. But since we're just starting out, I think it's better to kind of switch the model out. And that's also because this matches the notes. So I will save this, and I'm going to Control-C here and migrate everything again since I affected the model. So we'll say Python manage.py migrate, and it says no migrations to apply, so I'm going to say Python manage.py make migrations, and then call blog over. And it said alter field, so added this and it altered that, so perfect. So then we can also see it's affecting comments, and if we come over to comments, let's make sure that's working well. So we see create date there, and let's have that be also created date. So we're kind of gonna fix that as well, created date. And I will save that, and now let's actually run that same line again. Okay, so it's altered that in the comments as well. So now I have created date on both of them, and I'm going to say Python manage.py migrate, and it's going to apply all those changes. Let's start off by actually saying Python manage.py run server and see if that works for us. I'm going to refresh my drafts, and there it is, test post, perfect. So I come to my blog, I have nothing, come to my drafts, looks like that's working, hit test post, and it looks like I still can't register what I'm actually adding here. So if I type some stuff here, you can see that the colors are changing, I can highlight stuff, take away the underline, I can save it, but it's not actually showing the text. So somewhere along the line, I'm not injecting the text. So let's see if it works with comments. If I say add comment, let's put in a new author for this comment. So we'll say visitor. We'll type this text. So this is a comment text. I'm going to post the comment. And it looks like I can see the text there. So let's approve this. So that comment's been approved, but I still can't see the test post. So even when I click publish, I can see that nothing's really happening. So I come back to my blog, drafts, something's wrong with that publish button. So let's go check it out back here. All right, so coming back to the post detail page, which is where I should be going to, if we check out our views again to review this, coming down, once you click publish somewhere, so here it is. Once I click publish, it should be taking me to that post detail page. So something's up here. Let's go to that post detail page and see if we notice anything kind of fishy. So I'm going to get a little more room here. And you'll notice that I have this post content class, and up here, I'm calling the title. But over here in post content, I'm accidentally calling the title again. This should have been actually calling the content of that post, which makes sense. And the content of that post was the text. So let's type that in. We'll say text and save that and see if we can continue debugging this as I refresh. And now I see this is a test, add on edit, etc. So it looks like that actually worked. Let's see if hitting the publish button affects this. It still, I suspect, would not do anything. So there's publish, so we're not getting any sort of redirect on published, but we figured out why I wasn't showing that actual text of the post. So let's figure out how we can connect this publish button to actually work. I'm going to come back here, and then let's check out the actual draft page or what the post detail page looks like. All right, so let's actually try to track down the source of that error. When you hit that publish button, nothing's really happening. So if we come back to the post detail view, I see here that the button I'm pressing is this one right here. Class has a button default, and then if you look at the href, it's taking us to post publish with the primary key equal to post.pk. So let's go ahead and review that post publish URL and see if there's the issue there. So I'll come over here to urls.py, and lo and behold, the very last one is the publish one. Well, that's interesting. And it looks here that this is okay. It's going to take you to post, the primary key, and then publish. The view is post publish, so that makes sense, and the name matches post publish. So that means the culprit might be at the view. Let's go over to the views.py file and explore that. So I'll come to views.py, and then we'll scroll down until we actually get to that post publish view, that function view. And then here it is. It says login required, post publish. It'll get object or 404, and then it's going to call this method on that post object, the publish method, and then it's going to redirect you back to the post detail. So far that actually kind of makes sense. So maybe the problem is not with the view, but with the model itself. And if you remember back when we first started this, Django tried to warn us about a time zone problem, and we're basically about to see why it was trying to warn us. So one thing here is that I'm calling the method, but not executing it. So that's the main error we have, is that I was not executing it. So I'm going to save that. And then I'm also going to, well, you can see immediately, fix that. But besides that, I also want to make sure that the post is okay. So I'm going to come back to models.py. And remember that Django was warning us about some sort of time zone issue? Well, we can see here that I was supposed to be actually calling publish instead of just, whoops, over on views.py assigning it. So we're actually calling it to execute now, which makes more sense. And coming back to models.py, another issue that Django was complaining about, which is a little hard to explain if you haven't seen it often, is the issue of the date time field, the default being timezone.now. I was actually calling it to execute, but what it really wants up here is just the function itself. So you don't execute it here inside of the date time field. So now I'm going to save that, and I will also save my post detail page. And let's try this again. I'm going to refresh, and then I'm going to hit publish. And whoops, looks like I need to log in again. So we'll say test password, hit login. And now we can see that the publish is gone. So if I go back to my blog, now I see the test post with the one comment. Perfect. So let's try this all again and make sure that it's actually working. I'll create a new post. It's going to be by me. And this we'll call this last test post. And we'll say, hello world, my site is functional. I'll hit save. Looks like it says, hello world, my site is functional. If I hit drafts, I should see it there. Last test post, perfect. And then if I add a comment, I should be able to do that. We already tested this out, but let's try this again. Some visitor, blah, 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 or whatever, post a comment. Here I can see it can either be removed or approved. And I'm going to try to publish this. And it looks like the publish is gone. And I get the publication date, come to my blog, and I see last test post. Let's make sure I can actually remove and delete posts. See that there wasn't any issues with the delete views. I'm going to delete this post right here by pressing X. Perfect. Are you sure you want to confirm that you want to delete this? Like I mentioned, maybe having loader on everything isn't a good idea since this is constantly changing colors, but we'll go ahead and confirm. And it looks like it deleted it. So my blog. And I can also click on About, make sure it takes me to that template view about this company. Thanks for checking it out. And let's make sure I can log out and still see everything. So if I log out, hit my blog, hit test post, everything's functional. And it looks like we were able to successfully get rid of all the errors and troubleshoot this thing. And that was more or less a realistic experience of what it would be like debugging this stuff. I think the hardest thing as far as this particular debugging call was this one right here, where we come to models and fix this timezone.now. In fact, we haven't even migrated that change yet, so it hasn't taken place, but that's the only one where you really have to have experience to understand that you wanted to just pass in the function itself instead of calling the function. So to fix that again, what you'd have to do is come over here and then call python manage.py migrate again. So we'll do that before we actually host the website on some sort of server. Okay, thanks everyone. I hope you enjoyed the basics of the project, and I hope this gave you some ideas of how you can create your own blog. Thanks, and I'll see you at the next lecture.